Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 7 of the VML, brought to you in association with NRG Series and sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. We do 10 weeks of play, but week 7, this is a big week, being the last week of round robin play, the last week before playoffs. So this is the night, this is the cutoff, this is exciting. But before we really get into the action, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Nicole Callahan, also known as Lady of the Crease, and I am joined here by the phenomenal Arya Karamchandani. Hello, Arya. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. Excited to see some final week of playoffs action.
Oh, I am stoked. I cannot wait to get into this. For those of you who don't know, the VML is a league of people of marginalized genders within the Magic community. We start off with 64 players. We divide those players into 8 divisions. Everybody's been playing round robin since week 1 for 7 weeks. This is week 7. We're cutting to a playoff for the top 24 starting starting in our next week of play. We're taking 2 weeks off for the holidays, but we'll get to that more a little bit later. But there is a lot on the line for this top 24. There's a $3,500 prize pool, 25% of that going to first place. There is Channel Fireball Pro on the line as well to our top 8. So that's great. We've got cash, we've got gems, everybody that got anybody in the group. So even if you went like 3 and 4, like yours truly here, you get 500 gems per group stage match win. And the big thing, to our winner, our season 6 champion will go an invite to a future set championship. So a lot on the line. A big thank you to our sponsors, to Wizards of the Coast, to Channel Fireball, and to the NRG series for making this possible. So totally stoked. Cannot wait to get into the action this week. I love high stakes Magic. That's what we're here for. That's what we're doing. It's super competitive, and every match that we're going to be watching tonight has something on the line, whether it's a division lead or just a playoff spot in itself. It's so exciting. So let's take a look at what we've got here for our first matchup. We're starting over here with Emmaskyeward on Mono Green Aggro. Emma, one of our only 6-0s left in the tournament. There are 2. She is one of them, having brought either Mono Green or Mono White every week, which is crazy to me because I feel like Mono Green especially has dwindled in popularity, especially in recent weeks. What are your thoughts, Arya?
Yeah, Mono Green's definitely suffered a little with as a result of Crimson Vow, with other decks maybe getting a little more of a leg up than Mono Green has been. So definitely a less popular choice, but not an unheard of one. There were a lot of people who brought Mono Green to the Innistrad Set Championship, and there were several people who did pretty well with it. So it's definitely not
Is it Julie on Is It Epiphany, living up to her name, Now Julie is at 4-2, so this is an incredibly important matchup for her. At 4-3, there is a chance that you can. At 4-3, there is a chance you can make it into the playoffs at a wild card slot if you do not take down the division. Now, with Division 6, there's a lot of other people in contention. So Julie, this is kind of a must win if Julie is hoping to get second in the division. And it's absolute, and it's kind of a crapshoot about if Julie doesn't pull this off, about getting a wild card slot. So, do you have any thoughts on this? Is it Epiphany deck? It looks kind of run of the mill. Looks sort of like a you've got your unexpected windfalls, your divide by zeros, demon bolts, Cinderclasm in the main, just to hedge against aggro, which against Emmaskyeward probably a good idea since Emma has submitted an aggro deck each week since week 1.
Yeah, Julie's list is a little skewed to beating mono green, and she says as much here, with main deck Cyclone Summoners particularly being an impactful card. It's a bit of a gamble because Cyclone Summoners not the most impactful cards against some other decks, such as mono white or the Izzet mirrors, but really, really powerful as a way to go over the top of mono green. So Julie's list is pretty well set up for that.
And before we get into anything else, I do want to point out Julie's answer to favorite VML moment this season, that she has loved testing with fellow competitors and good friends, being part of the community, but also an honorable mention to Trotsky for submitting Dragon's Approach, and I think we all love that. So need to give that Dragon Approach deck just another shout out here because we love to see it. We love to see it here.
Yeah, and without going on this for too much, that's really my favorite part of VML. The whole community we have around the league, and all the awesome people who I test with, who I play against, who I interact with on coverage, and really everywhere else in the community is really, really what makes VML special, I think. So it's glad to see that that's been working for players as well.
No, it's phenomenal. Honestly, Arya, it's the way I met you. So how could it be bad? Right? No, the VML is great. VML definitely has always made me feel like I belong. So kudos to such a wonderful community, all the people here building such a wonderful and welcoming community for all. And I'm looking forward to this first matchup. Should it be a good one? So let's get into it. Now, again, this is Emmaskyeward, who is 6-0 this season against Julie Izzet at 4-2. Big match for Julie here. And I mean, honestly, a big match for Emma, too, because going into the playoffs at 7-0 is pretty intimidating to any opponent that would be playing her in the top 16. I will tell you that.
Yep, and it does matter for play draw standings throughout the tournament as well. So going in at 7-0, Emma would be pretty likely to have play throughout the entire tournament. So definitely a strong incentive for her to win as well.
That is very true. And as we are watching from Emma's side here, as Emma plays her second spell for the game, but only 2 spells in hand. And a Jawari Disruption going to take care of that Kazandu Mammoth. So lone pack leader on the battlefield, and that's all to speak of. Those Faceless Havens might need to do some work here. Any thoughts on these first few turns from our Izzet player? All we've seen so far is the Jawari Disruption and a spell land, a couple of tap lands.
I think this is close to an ideal start for mono green with a 2-drop into a 3-drop on the play, and just a Faceless Haven as well to get in for damage so that you're not playing into counter spells, and really just a good aggressive start. I think the Izzet deck with the Summoners is very good at going over the top of mono green, so if you can get a fast start, you can get pretty far ahead. So not ideal for Julie. You don't want to be going to 3 on turn 5, but that said, there's not really much to be done for the Izzet deck here. Werewolf, Backleader, and Faceless Haven are both threats to line up pretty well against most of the answers Julie's running.
Yeah, wow. At 3 life for turn 5, but Cyclone Summoner is here to bounce that pack leader back to hand. And that's a little bit harder to answer once it's on the battlefield. The mono green has some big creatures, but not quite that big. So Emma has some choices here now with her hand flush of spells. So it looks like a double spell, a mammoth, and the pack leader with a land and a passive back. So is this enough to say that Julie may have turned the corner here?
Maybe on the Izzet side, you really want to be at a slightly higher life total than 3 when you get down to Summoner. What Summoner does a good job of doing is holding off most of the mono green threats since it's just larger. But since Julie is down to 3 life, Julie needs to answer every single threat from Emma and can't allow a single threat to get through. So it doesn't really matter if the Cyclone Summoner is eating an attacker if Emma is still just getting in for lethal damage.
That is very true. So multiple threats going to be key here, but multiple answers in Burning Hands and Fading Hope, both main, Fading Hope, obviously a main deck card, but Burning Hands in the main as well. Something that we've seen a little more lately. Faceless Haven. Thinking about an activation here, and it looks like that will be the play from Emma's side. And looking to get in.
Yeah,
Thinking about it.
I think Emma is unfortunately 1 mana off of the play of activating 2 Faceless Havens and then attacking with both. She could Blizzard Brawl here to force a jump block with the Cyclone Summoner on Faceless Haven, since Blizzard Brawl gives Faceless Haven indestructible, but deploying multiple threats is also a good way to ensure she has a better chance of getting in next turn.
That makes a lot of sense. And being able to double spell on each turn seems like a great thing for Emma, as we see Liberator and Ranger class on the battlefield. But feeling confident enough that Cyclone Summoner are going to come in here, bringing Emma down to 13 and bouncing it back to hand. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's a pretty common play pattern for the Izzet deck, just rebuying those Summoner triggers. Unfortunately, not very good against double Faceless Haven when it's 3.
Yes. So it looks like that will, although got close, I think, there at the end. Emmaskyeward will finish that first game off, taking it down. So up 1 game, we move to sideboards. And any thoughts on Emma's sideboarding here? We see some thoughts for the fight spells, the inscriptions coming out. Maybe no need for the liberators, but looks like she's mulling it over back and forth.
I think the inscriptions coming out makes a lot of sense, as does a Blizzard Brawl. There's really not great targets in Julie's deck. For Ren and Sevens coming in, which is an interesting approach. It does let the mono green deck fight a slightly better long game, which is an axis that's good to attack on, since Cyclone Summoner goes over the top of most other things you're doing, and making, say, 7/7s, 8/8s with Ren and 7 allows you a way to prevent Cyclone Summoner from just ending the game when deployed at a medium to high life total. It does leave the deck a little more vulnerable to something like multiple Cyclone Summoners or Cyclone Summoners into Alrund's Epiphany, because it's a big, expensive spell to cast and does line up pretty poorly against Fading Hope.
That makes a lot of sense. And we'll see Emma going down to 6 here, but it's a pretty strong 6 in Ranger class double Mammoth, and then also drawing a Werewolf pack leader on the first draw step. So just a force and a pass back of the turn to Julie, who will play a tap land pass back. And I believe that is the Lone Inscription still in the deck.
Yep. And while Julie's curve of Interact on turn 2 and then Windfall on turn 3 was not all that good game 1, post board, that's a really interacting on early turns and then just casting a turn for Windfall is really, really hard for mono green to beat. So Emma's gotta hope that Julie just doesn't have a Windfall to cast here next turn.
Yes, so we'll see a land and Mammoth, as Essica's Chariot was the draw there. So no real sort of a fourth land in the Mammoth if Emma would like to play that tap next turn. But still plenty of other options as far as plays in hand, as the second divide by 0 from Julie will bounce that Mammoth back to hand, and learning No, sorry, looting away instead of learning. So no interest in whatever is left in the lesson board from Julie as we see Mammoth re-enter the battlefield here. Both players still at 20 life. Julie casting an expressive iteration. Taking a look at the top 3.
Yeah, with Julie missing a land drop there, the Teachings of the Archaics is just never going to actually be castable in the near future, just because Emma's always going to be able to deploy cards faster than Julie is, so it makes sense to discard that to the divide by 0. And at this point, Julie just really wants to find more lands so that she can get to her late game, so it makes sense to aggressively do things like loot in a spot like this.
Yes, we'll see that Essica's Chariot hitting the battlefield with a snakeskin veil to back it up. And another expressive iteration from Julie Izzette's side. Now, she's still at 20 life, so still going untouched here. And I feel like once you get past that like turn 5 or 6 unscathed, it starts to get a little dicey if you're playing against Izzet.
Yeah. This was the turn where Julie really, really wanted to be able to cast a Windfall. I think at 20 life with a Windfall cast, Julie would have been in a really, really strong position. She could have moved to her late game of Summoners to try and go over the top of Mono Green. Without that being an option, it's certainly good that she's at 20 life, but it's gonna take some time for her to get back to the spot she wants to be and to actually be set up for her late game. So, and the mono green deck is remarkably good at just putting out a ton of damage in that interval.
Oh, and we'll see Fading Hope on one of the cat tokens. And Emma, after a pause, decide to deploy the Snakeskin Veil on it to protect it. So it is now a 3/3 kitty cat. Ranger class coming down, as is Werewolf Pack Leader. So really unloading all the threats onto the battlefield. Going to crew up that chariot, copy the wolf, and get in for a pretty healthy attack there. 9 damage dropping down to 11. So with an inscription in hand as well.
And this is the thing about the threats out of the mono green deck with Pack Leader, Essica's Chariot, Ranger class. They're all threats that provide a lot of pressure, grow as the game goes on, and perhaps most importantly, provide card advantage so that you get to keep deploying threats.
All right, friends, we are back. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties on this side. OBS just not being our friend tonight.
No.
But a huge shout out to our producer, Phoebe, for keeping a cool head while I'm, running around like a chicken with the head chopped off, being like, I'm just going to type in chat so I don't have to worry about things. But Phoebe with the cool head, restarting everything, getting us all back to normal, back online. Phoebe's an absolute all-star. So thank you, Phoebe, for being you. We appreciate it. I say we get back into our match. Now, we were in the middle of game 2 of Emmaskyeward on mono green and Julie Izzet on Izzet Epiphany. So super exciting matchup. Big stakes here. Emma 6-0 on the season, Julie 4-2. Emma fighting for the highest seed it could be the highest seed in the entire VML this season and just have the play throughout the playoffs. And Julie fighting for a playoff spot to begin with. Could be second in the division. Could be a wild card slot. We will see. So we are here in game 2. We see Emma playing the Werewolf Pack Leader here on turn 2. Izzet Julie with a Field of Ruin at the ready this time. Not going to get got by one of those Faceless Havens again, but Divide by 0 going to take care of that Pack Leader back to hand for now.
Yeah, and from Julie's perspective, at this point, we know she doesn't have lands in hand, and that's a really heads up play on her part. Main phase casting the Divide by 0 with the knowledge that she doesn't have lands in hand. It's really important for her to get that learned. Either have an extra card to discard or to have one more card or to have a way to draw cards and maybe try and hit land drops next turn. And so recognizing that she can't afford to play into Snakeskin Veil by leaving the Divide by Zero up until Emma's turn. So main phase casting it to ensure she can get that learn trigger, even though waiting till Emma's turn might give her a better thing to target with it, such as Asuka's Chariot in hand.
Yes, that makes sense, and the more information, but knowing to play it at that time, that's why she's playing for a playoff spot. So definitely a heads up play by Julie. We'll see Mammoth be recast onto the battlefield, and this first expressive iteration to probably dig for that land that was missed last turn. So I'm going to take a look at the top three. That Field of Ruin not doing too much on its own. One to the hand, one to the library, and a land into exile that will be played. And Burning Hand's going to take care of that Mammoth, passing the turn back, and forced the draw for Emma here. So 5 lands available, which would mean an Asuka's Chariot with Snakeskin Veil backup.
Yeah. And one of the downsides we're seeing here for the Izzet deck in this matchup is the fact that the Izzet deck often feels like it's really playing from often feel like it's really playing from behind just on the cards angle in this matchup, with Asuka's Chariot being getting you multiple cards for one, Ranger Class drawing you cards, Werewolf Backleader drawing you cards, almost everything in the mono green deck just being some sort of 2-for-1. The Izzet deck will often feel like it is just slightly behind on cards, particularly with casting cards like Fading Hope. So having to essentially give away cards by not learning off of the second Divide by Zero and instead rummaging is a really, really rough spot for the Izzet deck to be in. And coupled with not making it up to not casting a Windfall on fodder, get a lot of mana to maybe cast an early Cyclone Summoner, definitely an awkward spot for Julie.
Yes, I totally agree. Cards like Expressive Iteration, being able to filter through and kind of revamp the hand, and maybe get a card up here and there in hopes to recover. We'll see the Fading Hope on Emma's cat token here. And Snakeskin Veil to the rescue. Protect the kitty. So no scry will happen. Fading Hope to the bin, and Faceless Haven the draw. But Julie with Field of Ruin in play here. So not as worried about it this time around, I'm sure, although it is mana intensive.
Yeah. In this spot, it's worth noting that Emma is choosing to leave up Inscription of Abundance rather than play out, rather than activate Ranger Class and get another trigger. And that's just, again, another really heads up play, because what that does is it plays around something like Galvanic Iteration into Cinderclasm, wiping Emma's board. This allows her to maybe get a 5/5 with either the pack leader or the cat token and make sure that she has something on board for post a board wipe like that.
Yes, that is very true. And she's going to need something pretty good here, taking a pretty big hit there last turn at 11 life and staring down a bit more than 11 power now. But Galvanic Iteration, definitely a scary card to see from Emmaskyeward's side, from Julie Izzette. It's just a question of what it's going to follow. Unexpected Windfall. Going to see a lot of cards off of this one.
Yeah, and in this spot, I think for Jill, it's really just a matter of surviving that one more turn without maybe without using all her mana from the treasures. If she manages to, she's untapping with a bunch of cards in hand, at least 7 lands, assuming she had a land drop this turn, and hopefully the ability to, hopefully for her, the ability to cast either Cyclone Summoner or Auron's Epiphany to stabilize. So if she can just live through this one turn cycle, she's probably in fine shape. But she also really does need answers because she is literally dead on board if she does not have an answer.
Yes, because this is quite a bit coming here. It's 6. This is 12 damage, staring down. Actually, 13 with the trigger from the Ranger class. And that's without Faceless Haven being activated here. So that's a lot of damage.
Yeah, and at this point, Julie's in an awkward spot where something like Fading Hope would keep her alive, but she wants to play around. She'd also want to play around something like Snakeskin Veil from Emma if she had the opportunity to do that. The advantage of waiting on that would be that perhaps she could copy it with Galvanic Iteration, but on the other hand, if she does end up copying a Fading Hope with Galvanic Iteration, that's all her mana gone. So she needs to make sure she takes a line that both conserves her resources for future turns so she can actually win from being this far behind, and also prevents her from just taking lethal damage here.
Yes, and there is that Fading Hope. And Emmaskyeward with the Inscription of Abundance in hand, but that's not going to do too much here. So not going to get the Scry, as Essica's Chariot costs 4. Werewolf Pack Leader will draw a card here. Julie Izzette making sure to deploy that Fading Hope before Emma would get to draw a card here. Making a copy of the kitty still, and still getting in for a pretty healthy attack. Oh, there is the activation on Werewolf Pack Leader, so that means Emma is tapped out here. Does Julie have an answer?
With a full 5 cards in hand, having drawn 4 of them, I think a large part of the time the blue-red deck is just going to have an answer here. And well, I suppose Julie Izzette would have priority regardless, thanks to Galvanic Iteration in her graveyard, but I don't think there's much of a chance of her not having an answer in hand. The only issue with the reason this line really favors Emma is even if Julie is able to answer Emma's board, Emma could just fire up the Faceless Haven, attack for 4, get a Ranger class trigger, and that's lethal damage regardless of whether Julie has something like a board wipe here with Galvanic Iteration, Cinderclasm, or Cyclone Summoner.
All right, and now one of the namesakes of the deck, we see Allrun's Epiphany out of this Izzet Epiphany deck from Julie Izzette. And a couple of birds here, and they're getting in. They're feeling frisky, bringing Emma down to 18. And what will the follow-up be? It looks like Cyclone Summoner. So at 5 life, Julie hoping to stabilize here. Everything's going back. So Emma's got a full grip, but Julie Izzette now has a 7/7.
Yep. And I think in Emma's spot, the thing I'm most scared of here is just another Cyclone Summoner. What makes Summoner so good in this matchup as a way of going over the top is that it itself is a giant wizard, so it doesn't bounce itself, it only bounces everything else and doesn't bounce other copies of itself. So Julie could just play out another Cyclone Summoner, get in for 7 and be threatening lethal, and that's really the last thing Emma wants to happen in this spot.
Well, I think that's one of the scariest things. When Julie had missed a uh-oh. Somebody heard you. There is second Cyclone Summoner. First one going to get in, bringing Emma down to 11. And like I was on turn 4, when Julie missed that land drop, all that meant was that Julie had a grip full of spells. So Julie needed to survive to be able to cast those spells, and now is being able to reap that. So we see Essica's Chariot and the Werewolf Pack Leader coming back down onto the battlefield. But 11 life, these 7/7s work fast. Oh my gosh.
And yeah, I think this is maybe not quite that surprising, given Julie missed a land on 7. So she clearly had a bunch of expensive spells in hand. But once the summoners start coming, Mono Green has a really hard time winning.
That was just the absolute floodgates. We got to see all 3 Cyclone Summoners showing up here. So that was pretty great. And a quick mulligan of that 6-land Sculptor of Winterhand from Emma. So looks like going to 6, a better 6 here. Going to ship a land, 3 lands, Ranger class, Old Growth Troll, who we haven't really seen in this matchup yet, and Renin 7, which were brought in from the sideboard. On an early Ranger class, turn 2 Ranger class, getting on the battlefield quick. After a Spikefield Cave was played on the side of Julie Izzette, and a land and just to pass the turn. Snakeskin Veil, I think, could be a pretty powerful card here, but it looks like Emma's just going to shove and play Old Growth Troll, which does resolve. Any thoughts about this, like, very aggressive push right onto the battlefield here from Emma?
Yeah, I think it's fairly important in this matchup. If Julie spends one of her first 3 turns bouncing something, I think Emma's fine with that, particularly with there not being another land to guarantee being able to hold up Snakeskin Veil next turn. You might as well use all your mana and just know that the Snakeskin Veil will be useful at some point.
Oh, and now that's another thing I feel like maybe I'd be afraid to see from Emma's side. Julie Izzette just cast Divide by 0, and when learning, chose Mascot Exhibition, the 7 mana sorcery. So passed on things like Teachings of the Archaics, even though Emma did mulligan, so maybe not as good, but Environmental Sciences, probably not going to miss lands here. Elemental Summoning, didn't want a creature even like earlier than the Mascot Exhibition. So I'd be a little nervous, I think, if I was in Emma's shoes.
Yeah, nervous maybe, but there's definitely lines that could lead to a Mascot Exhibition yet being actually beneficial to Emma. While Exhibition is pretty strong, it doesn't play particularly well with Cyclone Summoner. So the fact that Julie is getting that is maybe actually a good sign for Emma. Though a Cyclone Summoner followed up by a Mascot Exhibition could still be very scary.
That is very true. So I guess it depends on the order in which you'd like to cast them. A Cyclone Summoner followed by a Cyclone Summoner followed by a Cyclone Summoner is probably scarier. So
yeah, triple Summoner is sort of the dream for the blue-red deck.
I wonder how many times that has happened in a game of Magic, and I wonder how many times it has been beaten. That's the question. Triple Cyclone Summoner. Oh, sorry. Good.
I feel like in this spot, we're approaching the point where Julie needs to have some top end. She had close to the ideal start for a blue-red deck with just interaction into Windfall. It's definitely the start against which mono greens can struggle the most. But without an untapped 7 land into either Alrund's Epiphany or Cyclone Summoner, this is the period of the game in which she could start to fall behind a little.
We'll see. 6 mana, playing a Spikefield Cave, but just passing the turn back here with a full grip of 7 cards. So Emma's just going to get in the red zone. What else is there to do? What else does mono green like doing?
Yeah, and a precarious spot for Julie because she needs to have 2 pieces of interaction here to avoid dying. I mean, if Emma doesn't go for lethal, then Julie just goes to 1. But if Julie tries to interact with Emma's board and has exactly 1 piece of interaction, then Snakeskin Veil is lethal on its own, which is really scary.
Yes. And it looks like Emma's going to hold and try to be patient here. So Julie is at down to 1. Werewolf pack leader going to be the play in second main here. We'll see. That will resolve. So Snakeskin Veil up. Any threat is lethal from Emmaskyeward's side. We'll see what Julie Izzette has up her sleeve here.
Yeah, I think one of the more scary things in a spot like this could be something like a Galvanic Iteration Syndiclasm. Most single target removal is not going to line up particularly well against what Emma has going on, particularly with the Snakeskin Veil.
All right, listen. you know we're not supposed to watch these before.
I I promise you I didn't. I've just played way too much blue-red myself to not know the sort of play patterns that are likely to come up.
Oh, yes, I mean, honestly, if anybody ever has any questions about Izzet Epiphany, come find Arya because she knows everything. So,
Oh,
didn't you just write a primer?
yeah. Though, if you really wanted to know something about is it decks more generally, I'd point you to Julie Izzette. But for
Ah.
Epiphany, perhaps I'm happy to help when needed.
Absolutely. It looks like Julie Izzet has this under control here. Divide by 0, taking care of that old growth troll back to hand on the main phase here, on Julie Izzette's main phase. So perhaps looking for something. We'll see what she grabs an environmental sciences this time around, and we'll play it. Find a basic land, gain a couple life, shuffle up that library. Island is the call. So
Yeah. And in this spot, if I'm in Emma's seat, I'm very scared again because Julie only had a tap land last turn, is using an environmental sciences to get a land this turn. So that means that she hasn't had the ability to play an untapped 7th land, which means Cyclone Summoners, if in hand, would not have come down, and there's several spells in hand, which means there's probably at least one Cyclone Summoner coming in the near future, or Elrond's Epiphanies if Summoners aren't present.
yes, and we see Renan 7 from Emmaskyeward, but Jawari Disruption going to take care of that, and a pass back of the turn to Julie Izzette over here. And we'll see if that 7th land will come down here. And it will, but it's tapped. Shatter Skull, the Hammer Pass, excuse me, here. And a Foretold card. I wonder what that could be.
It could be anything.
It could be, it could be a Demon Bolt. It could, right?
I think one of the downsides of Emma's list running several of the newer cards, running stock mono green list rather than a bunch of the newer cards, is definitely the lack of an ability to threaten lethal in this spot. Because one thing that Crimson Vow brought for these decks was the ability to, in positions like this, just be able to play Ulvenwald Oddity and just have lethal damage on your opponent out of nowhere. And with no faceless savings drawn this game, Julie is fairly safe on most turns where she untaps with no creature, where Emma untaps with no creatures in play. But the second Emma has a creature down, things like Inscription, Snakeskin Veil start to get very, very scary and threaten lethal quickly.
Oh, no, for sure. And we know that Ulvenwald Oddity, Froghemoth used to be the the old choice, which honestly was a pretty middling magic card. I think it was fine; it served its purpose, but Ulvenwald Oddity, a much better hasty option for the mono green deck. We see Emmaskyeward playing Kazandu Mammoths, which has largely been phased out of the mono green decks, but it definitely supplies a bigger body and comes down a turn earlier. So maybe,
Some really disciplined play from Julie here, avoiding going for that Aaron's Epiphany that's presumably foretold until she can Galvanic Iteration. It would have been fairly free for her to go for it last turn. But recognizing that her route to victory here is probably most likely going to come with double copying Epiphany, and so waiting a turn, just interacting not particularly efficiently with the board just to make sure she can copy the Alrund's Epiphany in a turn cycle.
Yes, no, a very, very smart, very heads-up play by Julie Izzette there. And now 4 cards in hand, one of them being a mascot exhibition. We got 4 flying attackers, no way to block those on Emma's side. So getting across for 4, bringing Emma down to 16. And Julie Izzette may have, another Galvanic Iteration and mascot exhibition. So quite a few attackers here now with the next extra turn, and I believe a Hall of Storm Giants as well in that line of lands.
Yeah, and Hall of the Storm Giants is actually a really difficult one for the mono green deck to beat. Post-pod, it generally doesn't get to that point in the game, but it's quite frustrating for the deck just as a large blocker that has Ward 3, because a Ward 3 means that something like an Inscription fighting it in combat is not actually likely to be possible.
That is definitely a good point. And the size bot, mono green gets big, but they usually don't get 7/7 big like the Cyclone Summoners or Hall of Storm Giants. We'll see iteration. Oh my goodness, double Burning Hands. So we'll see a copy of Burning Hands, and wow, that was quite a finish there. So Julie Izzette gonna take down this match, and the undefeated Emmaskyeward 2-1. So Julie should be in that was from our Division 6, I believe, and depending on everything else that happens, I think Rebecca Black was also 4-2, but it looked like Julie had a better game win percentage. So we'll have to the little things we got to work out on Sunday. So I can say pretty confidently that Julie should at the very least lock up a wild card spot, if not second place in that division. So with good breakers and everything.
Regardless of position, 5-2 should be good enough for a wildcard slot in basically any division.
Yes, that is fantastic. So congratulations to Julie, but also congratulations to Emma for an impressive round robin there, going 6-1. So great job by both players. That was fabulous. And we are going to take a quick oh, okay. So I know some of us are in a quick break, but if we are not, make sure that you are following the VML on Twitter and on YouTube. We are VMLMTG, pretty much on any social media you could find us on. So on YouTube, here on Twitch, of course, and on Twitter, give everybody a follow. Take a second, follow Arya here, hogpog_98 on Twitter, and it's the same on Twitch, correct? Hogpog_98. Follow her on Twitch. She's a phenomenal streamer, phenomenal player. Phoebe, we want to plug our producer Phoebe as well. Make sure you give her a follow. Gosh, I want to get this right. Code Indigo, no underscores, correct? Wonderful. So make sure you follow our producer Phoebe here on Twitch as well. That's Code Indigo, CODE. Oh God, I can't spell indigo. INDIGO. Listen, I'm here to talk, not to spell. So, but Code Indigo, make sure you give her a follow. Show her some love, and show us a little love as we get into our next matchup here. Division number 2. We have Jen Crotts, Team Sentry Box on Orzhov Snow Control. I never know what to call this deck because it's like black. It's like Orzhov, Edgar, Snow, Controlled, Lolth, something. So
yeah. So, it's always hard finding a line because everyone calls them control decks, but also I'm not used to my control decks running 8 1-drop creatures and 4 2-drop creatures and like another 8 3-drop creatures. So it's when do control decks get to do that?
Right. It seems like very strange. Like I like that Shambling Gas is more meant to be like a removal spell that might deal a couple of damage or a ramp spell. And same thing with iTwitch. iTwitch is just like, get a card from your sideboard. Like I feel like they're strange because they're creatures, but they're not really creatures. Like they are.
Yeah.
I've probably won a couple of games attacking with, an army of iTwitches in the air or something. But but the real centerpiece of this deck is Edgar Charm Groom. So do you have any thoughts on this deck as a whole, or on Edgar as a card, or any of the other cards that are surrounding him?
Definitely a fan of Edgar in this matchup particularly, which we'll see is against a similar black-based deck, where Edgar's just a very, very difficult threat to remove. It's just resilient and slowly just even if you keep answering, we'll slowly just ping someone to death with vampires. So big fan of it for the mirror. I can't say I've seen enough of it to know how good it is in other matches, but I do hear that when you assemble multiple copies of Edgar, that's something of a combo because that just gives you 2 vampires every turn.
Right?
So something to look out for.
Yes, no, having the Edgar and the coffin and going back and forth, and it gets pretty wonky. So as long as the coffin itself can't be destroyed, because then it makes things a little awkward, and then you get sad. But no, I definitely, like you said, I do like Edgar a lot in this matchup. As we take a look at our other side, we have Zabracus, who is on, again, this is mono black aggro, but normally you don't see aggro decks with sweepers. So,
Yep.
so I don't know what we're doing. You know, like Sedgemoor, which has Magecraft, like aggro decks don't play that many spells, right? Like, but this one does.
Yeah, and I think the fact that these are 2 very similar decks that have been both categorized as control and aggro speaks a lot to how versatile these decks are and their play patterns. Uh, Based on your draw, you may very much end up being aggressive, curving 1, 2, or 3, or just looking to clear up the late game with a board wipe. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these 2 incredibly similar decks interact in terms of just defining roles in the matchup as each game progresses.
No, for sure. One of the things that I will notice, there's cards to watch, but then there's cards that I'm surprised I'm not seeing here. And one of them is the removal spell Eaten Alive, which would be one of the better removal spells for Edgar Charm Groom, but is unfortunately missing from this list in for like instead 2 Infernal Grasps, and then obviously the 4 Blood on the Snow and 3 Meat Hook Massacre as well. So not as much individual removal as we're used to seeing, but we'll see how this matchup goes down. So again, we've got Jayne Crotts on the Orzhov Snow Control and Zabracus on Mono Black Aggro. I'm just going to leave them as question marks. And we're going to be watching from the side of Jayne Crotts as she takes a look at this 7-card hand. 2 colorless lands in hand, but going to keep here. And Zabracus is going to kick us off with a Duress, taking a look at that hand and quickly taking Vanishing Verse. Vanishing Verse, I believe, one of the most efficient removal spells in Standard at the moment. One of the big bonuses of playing black-white. And any thoughts on the starts from both of our players so far?
Yeah, we're seeing one of the downsides of black white here, with the mana definitely being a little clunky, and you're not having all snowlands for Faceless Haven, so it's definitely not free to play an extra color in this snow deck. But well, Jen really needed to draw a white or black land in those first few turns to get some colored mana going, and she did, and now she's in pretty decent shape with both the Lalts in hand, providing some pretty strong late game, and Zabracus's deck, which is supposed to be the aggressor, perhaps not having gotten off to a particularly strong start in terms of applying pressure.
Yeah, we'll see that Sedgemoor Witch bite in the dust. Jen happily paying the 3 life to get rid of that. But Sorin the Mirthless is going to be the follow-up, making a 2/3 flying lifelinker. Pretty good blocker for Eye Twitch.
Yeah, and just as I was saying that maybe the mono black deck is not in the best shape, Sorin just, it shows how swingy this matchup can be with just one planeswalker coming down and sticking without pressure on the other side, really just taking over the game. And this goes for both Sorin and Lalt. We're in a spot like this. Just moments ago, Zabracus may have been behind, but now she's gotten 2 turns with the planeswalker while Jen hasn't, and she's just several cards ahead.
Yes, because that 2/3 even lines up very well against the Loath Spiders, which are 2/1s, reaches, menace, but need both of them to block. So with the Deadly Dispute here, Jen will be able to deny the life gain from the vampire, but that's just like a temporary fix to a problem that is still on the battlefield. So deciding what to learn here, confront the past, is a pretty clean answer to Soren.
Yeah, it might be a little slow in a spot like this. And that said, Jen does need to answer Soren because in a spot like this, a card that's really scary out of Zabracus' deck that there are several copies of would be something like Meat Hook Massacre to kill the spiders but not the vampires from Soren. So answering that Soren at some point is something of a priority. It doesn't need to be this instant, but it does mean that the lot will be slightly vulnerable where it comes down.
Yes, and because we'll see that necrotic fumes was the pick here. Oh, speaking of Lolth, Zabracus is going to land her Lolth before Jen can get hers down. So a little behind here as Lolth makes a couple of 2/1 menace spiders and then that 2/3 vampire and still at a healthy 18 life while Jen is at 14.
Yeah, and this is one of the big advantages of being on the play in this matchup. The Lot Spiders having Menace gives a pretty large advantage to the player who plays Lot first, because it means if you have a Lot out and your opponent has a Lot out, you can attack with your Spiders and just kill their Lot. That's not with the Menace, the Spiders are not particularly efficient at blocking. So if you get the first Lot out, you're reasonably far ahead.
Yes. We can say, though, that Jen has 2 more backups in hand. So perhaps that could help. Jen does have 5 cards too. Zabracus is 3, but Zabracus certainly has a bit more command on the board at present. With that Warlock class, that's kind of just been hanging out so far. Hasn't really done anything yet, but that could change shortly. Zabracus back up to 20 from that attack. Lolth gonna draw a card, lose a life, so back up to 4 cards.
Yep, and I think in this spot for Zabracus, what she really wants is some way to interact with the spiders. Blocking them is never really feasible because 2 menace creatures is kind of a lot, and Lot naturally has relatively low loyalty. So she needs something like a Meat Hook Massacre or maybe a removal spell or 2 to actually deal with these spiders. But if she finds that, having 2 planeswalkers on board is just such a huge edge.
No, for sure. And we'll see that Meat Hook Massacre coming down, taking care of all of the X1s, and a second Warlock class. That's a card I feel like I've only started seeing in constructed play very recently and still very lightly. What are your thoughts on the card Warlock class?
It's seen a little fringe play in historic decks with sacrifice themes, though I don't believe it's proven to be quite good enough there. It's very strong in a deck like Zabracus specifically, more so even than it would be in a deck like Jen's, just by virtue of giving the deck access to an ability, a way to apply pressure that isn't through combat. The deck struggles a little to close out the game against previously it struggled a little to close out the game against other controlling decks. And what Warlock class, particularly when paired with something like Meat Hook Massacre does, is it gives the deck the ability to sometimes in the late game just attack with the team, get a bunch of drains off of creatures that trade, and then follow that up with a bunch of drains with Warlock class at end of turn. So it allows the deck to apply a lot more pressure than it used to be able to.
That is definitely a really good insight on the card, because it does seem like the higher levels are very expensive, or at least the highest level on it is very expensive, but the static ability seems pretty fair. As we see, Necrotic Fumes is going to take care of Zabracus's Lolth, but one of the sad things about Necrotic Fumes in a deck like this is that you do exile the card that you are sacrificing. You exile your own. You don't get to sacrifice it. So no triggers from like a shambling gas or an eye twitch, but I guess not as important when it's a professor of symbology or something like that. But that Soren's still cranking out there on the battlefield, making another vampire. So we've got a 2/3, and we've got like and concealing curtains. Interesting card. I'm not the biggest fan. I was never a fan of like Vendilion Click sort of effects, but do you have any thoughts on the card in maybe Zabracus' deck in particular, or just as a standalone in a vacuum?
Yeah, I think the card fills a very important role specifically in this mono black deck. It's a large blocker against aggressive decks, so it's a card that helps there while still having legs in more controlling matchups as a 3/4 attacker. That also gives you some insight into what your opponent's doing, with that information being really, really important against decks like Izzet. So while I don't think it's the most powerful card on its own, it fills some really it fulfills some really important purposes for this mono black deck specifically, and is a really good tool at fighting in against other controlling decks, which is a broad umbrella under which I'd probably categorize this mirror, though it's always hard to say.
No, it's definitely good insight. And like you said, the mono black deck can be lacking in some of those bigger bodies. It makes a lot of 2/1s, a lot of 1/1s, but to have a 3/4 to kind of protect things like your Loth or your Sorin seems like a really good thing to have. Now we see Zabracus down to 2 cards in hand. One of them is a pest summoning, and then we've got Jen with double Loth and a Felsinger. And able
Yep.
to able to double spell next turn as well. So we'll see if she ends up doing that as Zabracus plays the Skullport Merchant and pest summoning as well. No, Skullport Merchant is definitely a way that Zabracus can recover some of the card disadvantage that she has had so far.
Yeah, it's not even card disadvantage for Zabracus though. It's just storing cards for later, because those 2 Warlock classes in play, they haven't had their level 2 activated. They can just draw Zabracus more cards at some point in the future.
That is very true. It's definitely has more than the level 1 and level 3. So that level 2 can prove to be very valuable here as Jen draws our first anchor that we've seen this match so far, a Deadly Dispute as well, off of the Felstinger. And Skullport Merchant going to do some drawing of their own. So Zabracus, she is going to sack a pest to gain a life up to 26. Jen is at 4 life, but both players do have Meat Hook Massacre in play. So
Yeah, the massacres are quite good at effectively neutralizing each other, but not 100% there. In that, depending on whose turn it is, you can stack your triggers to make sure your massacre triggers resolve before theirs, and that's potentially a way for a player to just close the game out of nowhere. The way Meat Hook Massacre works, or the way the triggers work, is the player whose turn it is always has the triggers resolve second. So if, for example, Zabracus were able to get Jen down to 1, then Zabracus could sacrifice tokens on Jen's upkeep to drain her out.
yes, and that is a scary thing and something that Jen will have to keep in mind. Like it actually would be not a great thing, if that's when Jen cast her Meat Hook after Zabracus had already had hers out there. The way that it's stacked, Jen had been at like 6, dropped down to like 2, and then went back up to 6. So definitely scary, and definitely makes it harder to plus on Loth as well. So
yeah, again, quite indicative of how this mono black deck is perhaps significantly more able to apply pressure than the black white deck is, making the black white deck need to lean on more powerful cards like Edgar. With that Sorin coming down, having gotten a bunch of value to start with, the mono black deck just having those 2 Warlock classes gives the deck some level of inevitability at this point, because eventually one of those Warlock classes is going to get up to it's going to get up to its final level, which is level 3, and that in conjunction with Meat Hook Massacre will almost certainly be lethal.
yes, and we see Jen taking a swing here at Sorin. A pest's gonna jump in front and thinking about what to do, but we'll jump in front of that Felstinger. So just the spider gonna get across, kind of ping Sorin down. Second Felstinger coming into play here. Not gonna sack, like I said earlier, kind of at a very low life total, and planning on and drawing a card off of Loth here. And it is an eye twitch.
debating on whether to keep open that Deadly Dispute or to play the Eye Twitch, and it looks like Deadly Dispute will stay up as Jen is at 3, Zabracus at 25. But the boards have switched now from, I think, earlier in the game where it looked like Zabracus kind of had a hold on everything, 2 Planeswalkers, 2 Warlock classes, a couple of creatures, Meathook Massacre, and Jen didn't really have anything going on, but it looks like she's starting to roll a little bit better here.
Yeah. It's worth noting that keeping up the Deadly Dispute actually very, very important for Jen because it allows her to block without killing the Skullpot Merchant. Both the Felsinger and Edgar Charm Group have enough power on Death Touch to just kill the Skullpot Merchant, but if the Skullpot Merchant dies in combat, a Warlock class level up is more than lethal, so the game would just end on the spot. So Jen needs to be able to block the Skullpot Merchant without actually killing it, and the Dispute does a good job doing that, while also maybe getting the Edgar dead so that she can start gaining some life off of 1/1 tokens over the next few turns.
And it looks like Zabracus wanted to do some work of her own, so sacking that Shambling Gas to draw a card off the Skullport Merchant, making a treasure token, and gonna cash in the Sorin to make a 2/3 flying vampire with lifelink. So an interesting play there.
Yeah, and we're back at the spot where Zabracus is maybe gonna have the opportunity to get lethal damage here on Jen's upkeep if she stacks it. If she stacks a trigger and Jen doesn't have any responses, but responses from Jen that allow her to gain life would be quite awkward.
Yeah. So we'll see. It seems like Zabracus is on this, and Meathook Massacre going to trigger off the Skullport Merchant sacrifice. And Jen thinking, is there anything that she can do here? Just an Eye Twitch, a Loath, and a couple of Faceless Havens in play, and it looks like that will do it. The stack gets you sometimes. So so Zabracus taking down game number 1 here as we move to sideboards. One of the interesting things that I see here in the black-white deck is the amount of lessons in the side, or at least the assortment of lessons in the sideboard. I see 2 environmental sciences, 1 necrotic fumes, 2 mascot exhibitions. And normally it's like a smattering. It's just like, oh, there's 1 pest summoning, 1 environmental sciences, 1 mascot exhibition, 1 confront the past, things like that. And it seems that Jen has doubled up on a lot of these rather than kind of having a bigger selection, kind of having more of the more popular ones. What are your thoughts on that as a sideboard decision?
I think it's pretty important and a strong deck building choice for the black-white side. Since the deck has Eye Twitch and Professor of Symbology, in long games, the deck's going to grind and get 3, 4, 5 lessons from the sideboard a lot. So making sure that every single one of the lessons you're getting is a card you're drawing, is something relevant you're casting, it's actually getting your card's value is really important. And that makes having multiple of the good lessons rather than just a smattering of lessons that may or may not situationally be relevant definitely stronger for the black-white player.
No, I love it. I love it. So good choices over here by Jen as we see finishing up, shaving a couple of the Fell Singers, shaving a Infernal Grasp here. And Blood on the Snow, gonna shave one of those as well.
Yep, Blood on the Snow when it's destroying creatures mode is maybe not the most impactful card in this matchup. Just a lot of the threats in both decks are recursive and recursive or have some effect when they die. So wiping, just straight up destroying them, not all that useful. But in its destroy planeswalkers mode against Zabracus, who has not only Lalt but Sorin, it has the potential to get Jen back from a position where she's otherwise pretty far behind, like last game.
Yes, and unfortunately, Jen starts off with a mulligan of 5, a pretty strong 5, all things considered, but it's still 5 cards. Eye Twitch, Vanishing Verse, Professor of Symbology, and a Plains and a Swamp. But Professor and Eye Twitch hopefully going to help recover some of the cards as we see Environmental Sciences come to the hand here, Concealing Curtains on the side of Zabracus. And we'll see.
As far as fives go, they could certainly be a lot worse. I think a long game when you're on the multi-5, pretty hard to fight, but the way you do that is with incremental card advantage, like with things like Planeswalkers. And the way to get that going is to be ahead on board so your opponent can't pressure them. So having a hand that just plays a 1-drop, plays a 2-drop, plays a removal spell and a creature on 3 does set up Jen at least to be in a spot where she has draws that allow her to get back into this, perhaps by leveraging something like a Lalt to draw several cards with her already ahead board presence.
No, it's a very good point. Jen attempting to Vanishing Verse, but Zabracus going, no, before you exile it, I'm going to sack it. Draws a couple cards off a Deadly Dispute. We see Meat Hook Massacre. A lot of stuff going on. So there goes Jen's board. Just an Environmental Sciences in hand. And the choices here, not too overwhelming. There's Mascot Exhibition, Confront the Past, or Environmental Sciences, already putting the Necrotic Fumes in hand, thinking of the second one. So it looks like Jen's going to go the route of removal, hopefully. So trying to make sure that Zabracus can't run away with a Planeswalker or something. So keeping up insurance for that with Confront the Past. But a follow-up Shambling Gas and a Professor of Symbology. Environmental Sciences, gonna grab a Plains. That Plains will come into play. Professor, gonna learn. So back to the sideboard. run out of lessons.
And cards like Shambling, cards like Eye Twitch, Professor of Symbology, really key to this black-white deck being so good at recouping after mulligans, with all those cards essentially providing at least 2 cards in value. Like even the Meat Hook Massacre, looking like a 3-for-1 killing 3 things on Jen's side of the board, actually traded for almost 0 cards for Jen because she got 1 card off each of the Eye Twitches and 1 card off the Professor of Symbology already. So there really wasn't even any card disadvantage happening in a spot like this, and that's what makes the deck so good at recovering when behind on cards early.
Ooh, and we'll see Graveyard Trespasser on the side of Zabracus, but Edgar, Charmed Groom. If there is any card that is going to help turn this game around, it would probably be that one.
Yeah, I think Edgar is likely the card Zabracus least wants to see at any point in this matchup, really. The card is not only essentially unkillable for her, it also just pumps out a stream of 1/1s which have a lifelink on them, so combating Zabracus's biggest advantage, which is the ability to slowly apply pressure over the course of a game. So Edgar's kind of an unbeatable card for the mono black deck. The deck has to go around the Edgar or over the Edgar. There's really no going through it. And that makes it an excellent draw for Jen in this spot.
Yes, and with Jen's engine is it works on a lot of like Deadly Dispute and Meat Hook Massacre and things like that. So even pumping out those vampires, those can definitely be pretty valuable. As we see Necrotic Fumes exiling that Professor of Symbology to take care of Sorin. So Edgar holding down the fort though here on Jen's side. So still at a healthy 22 life, even though if it felt like the first few turns didn't go exactly how Jen would have liked, having less cards in hand and everything. But now looking at the battlefield, Zabracus definitely with more things, but not really able to profitably attack. And Loth is going to bite the dust with this Confront the Past, taking care of that, and a Shambling Ghast to follow that up. Blood on the Snow in hand for Jen. No 6th land right now, but that may come at another point. So
yeah, even a treasure off the Shambling Gust would suffice to be able to cast us Blood on the Snow, and Blood on the Snow is really strong in conjunction with the bod that Jen has played towards, with Edgar meaning Zabracus hasn't been able to get in on the ground, but has had to keep deploying creatures to the ground to maybe at some point get around it, leaves Jen in a spot where she's gonna get several creatures off of this Blood on the Snow. She's not only gonna not lose her Edgar, she's also going to get something back, which is really, really strong. And Zabracus doesn't really have a way to play around this, because either she just sits back and the Edgar, well, slowly takes over the game, or she plays into it, and then the Blood on the Snow is that much worse.
Okay, I was a fan of that. The Zabracus cast Blood on the Snow on the destroy all planeswalkers mode, so nothing died. But because she had paid enough in snow mana, she got her Loth back. So it was Blood on the Snow, but it pretty much just said, return target 5 mana planeswalker to the battlefield.
Yeah, and Lalt is a particularly good planeswalker against Blood on the Snow, because if Jen was to wipe the board here of all creatures, Zabracus would get 7 counters on that Lalt and immediately be able to start rebuilding. Meanwhile, if Jen doesn't kill all creatures, maybe destroys all planeswalkers, gets the Lalt off the board, well, that's 3 menace spiders and a flyer, so Jen's probably dying in the next few turns.
So this is another precarious spot where Blood on the Snow, very good card, but we'll see what happens here. Edgar getting in, Shambling Gas getting in. We'll see what Zabracus's blocks are going to look like here, if any, and it looks like she's going to be lining them up. Now, each player with 1 card left in hand, but Zabracus with a little more going on in the creature department, and it looks like Shambling Gas is going to just kind of hop in front of the Trespasser hop in front of the Shambling Ghast, and Shambling Ghast going to hop in front of Edgar. So,
yep. What these attacks allow Jen to do is now she's free to destroy the Lalt without having as much pressure on board from Zabracus. A Blood on the Snow destroying all planeswalkers means at least there's now only 2 spiders, but still not ideal, because that would still leave her taking lethal in a turn or 2.
Oh, that's interesting. So yes, look, Edgar comes back and symbology. So Jen blowing up all the creatures, Blood on the Snow, getting that mascot exhibition, almost able to cast it now. But Loth at a pretty high loyalty total here, so it'll be interesting to see which way to go with a Faceless Haven to protect as well.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure what the cost on the ultimate for Lalt is, but that potentially could be something we see happening in the next turn or 2. I know the ultimate essentially turns all damage into 8 damage, regardless of how much you actually get in for with your creatures. And well, with Jen being at 9, that's a pretty scary ultimate if that's something Zabracus has access to, and has the ability to play further creatures from hand. But just making 2/1s also probably going to be lethal over the next few turns, with that being 8 power on board plus Metuk Massacre.
Yeah, and the Edgar Markov's Coffin is great, making, pumping out some life-linking vampires, but it doesn't do much against menace spiders. So, and it's only really chump blocking a Trespasser or a Faceless Haven. And every time that Trespasser gets in, it drains. So, and I'll land the draw on Jen's side. Not the worst draw, because now she can play Mascot Exhibition, maybe get some blockers in here, but at 8 life, things are looking pretty precarious.
Yeah, and the fact that the Lalt is still drawing cards, so if Jen does stabilize here and manages to avoid taking lethal, she still has to deal with the fact that there's a Planeswalker on the other side that's just going to keep pulling Zabracus further and further ahead. Not an ideal spot for her in this matchup.
No, not at all. We see Zabracus at a healthy 25, activating that Faceless Haven. Gonna get in, but doesn't look like it's a, no party here. Just half the creatures getting into the red zone. Enough to be lethal. So we'll see a double block on one of the spiders, 4/4, and a 1/1 going to jump in front of a 2/1, and the 3/2 going to jump in front of Faceless Haven. And now this still does a little bit of damage because 2 damage comes across from that spider, bringing Jen down to 7. And 2 of Zabracus' creatures are going to die, bringing Jen further down to 5, and Zabracus up to 29. And it is nighttime. So that graveyard trespasser just became a graveyard glutton. So that represents even more damage every turn. Loath the draw on Jen's side, but it's a good draw.
Yeah, it does a good job making sure that Jen's probably not going to die on the board from creatures over the next turn. She's probably at least going to be able to chump block and maybe get that Edgar back, but it doesn't help save her from the fact that the Metic Massacre is slowly whittling away at her life total, and some draws like another Metic Massacre would just be lethal instantly on the spot.
Yeah, so Meat Hook Massacre is definitely the backbreaker here for Jen. And then Faceless Haven's going to be coming right back in. Here it is. And I saw Loth get highlighted there, but not going to deal with Loth until after we see how combat goes here. Graveyard Glutton getting in this time. Going to eat a couple of cards from the graveyard. It's a matter of what? Professor of Symbology biting the dust, as well as another creature card. So down to 3 for Jen. So needs to make sure that making blocks here, but can't have too many things die, which is very tricky.
Yeah. Jen is in a spot where she's awkwardly incentivized to avoid killing any of Zabracus's creatures, because if she kills 3 creatures, 4 creatures, I suppose, with the 1 life off of the vampire token. If she kills all 4 creatures, then then she's just dead. And even with 3 creatures, if Zabracus has a way to remove her own Faceless Haven post-combat, then Jen would be dead.
Yeah, like Deadly Disputes, anything like that. Or we see all these Loth triggers and Meat Hook Massacre triggers. So yes, Jen again down to 1 life, which is a really scary place to be. Zabracus up to 36. That Loth is on 9. So why not ultimate, right? So we do see an ultimate here. So any amount of damage that Zabracus would deal would become 8. So
and it's worth noting that Shambling Us notably targets creatures your opponents control. So for those wondering, there was unfortunately not the ability for Zabracus to target her own Faceless Haven with Shambling Us for lethal.
Oh yes, unfortunately for Zabracus, but fortunately for Jen, that is the case. So it looks like Edgar not able to get in here, but Jen, realizing the writing is on the wall, going to be unable to menace block these spiders without having them die, and only able to gain 2 life this time around with the vampire. It looks like this might be lights out on this one for Jen. We'll see. I'm not really seeing a way out.
Yeah, unfortunately, with 3 attackers, 2 of which have menace, Jen is letting through at least 2 damage, and while she's also gaining 2, there's also at least 1 creature dying, so that's at least 3 life lost, which makes it, I believe, not possible for her to survive this turn.
Oh boy. Tybalt. Tybalt's here. Tybalt shows up and the party ends, right? Tybalt exiling Edgar, and two spiders getting in, not even able to block them profitably. So Zabracus is going to take this match down 2 games to none, and that will kind of shore up Division 2 a bit better now. So Division 2, we were looking at a 5-1 and 3 4-2 players, and one of the 5-1 was playing the other 4-2, and now these were our other 4-2 players. So it looks like I think this puts Jen in good. Zabracus in good shape for a divisional playoff spot, whereas Jen can still possibly make it on breakers. So, or on with a wild card slot. So 4-3 definitely still live. It's not, it's not done, but keep your fingers crossed. Do your breakers dance. Yeah,
depending on how the other match in Division 2 pans out, which has, I believe, a player at 5-1 against another player at 4-2, it's possible that Zabracus may end up not getting the division spot, but she should have at the very least a wildcard slot locked up, with 5-2 just being enough to get you a slot, wildcard or otherwise, if you make it to that record.
No, for sure. Yeah, 5-2 should be good for a wild card slot. 4-3. I know we had a couple 4-3s last season, a few. So it's, you never want to make it that close.
We're gonna have at least one 4-3 this season, and I think a few more. So
for sure.
Definitely not out of the running.
Yes, well, good games, both of our players, both Jen and Zabracus. Best of luck to you. Hope you both make. Well, I'm sure Zabracus should, but hope, Jen, that you also make the cut for the playoffs. I'll love to see. Keep battling, and but saying keep battling, we're going to take a little bit of a break here. So check out some interviews that I had the pleasure of doing, which I will say has been my favorite part of the season so far. So because it's given me a great opportunity to meet and talk with some of the awesome people within our community. So y'all are great. Enjoy these. I hope you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed making them, and we'll catch you in a few minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Who, What, Werewolf. My name is Nicole Callahan. I will be your hostess of Howls tonight, and I'm joined here by the wonderful Jayne Q. Jayne, how are you doing on this eternal night?
I'm doing well, thank you, Nicole.
Very happy to have you here. Very happy to be kicking things off, playing around here on Team Werewolf here on the plane of Innistrad. So why don't we start there, and why don't you tell me about your favorite werewolf card?
I am really partial right now to Graveyard Trespasser / Graveyard Glutton. It's I think the 4th ever black werewolf.
I am a big fan of that card. It's a tough card to deal with.
Oh yeah, that's what makes it so great.
Yeah, right. That's what I love the mechanics. It's the ward and the life drain and stuff. It's got a lot going on in a in a 3-drop body. So that's a good choice. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So how about on the flip side? We'll try to bury the hatchet for a second. And do you have a favorite vampire card here?
Well, I do have a bit of a storied past with Anya Falconwrath.
Oh.
The Madness Commander deck is one of my favorites. I just have a soft spot right here where a stake goes for Anya.
Right, the little bullseye. Oh, that's great. Mad for Madness. And I'm here. I fully support. I'm actually surprised that Madness did not show back up.
Oh, yeah, me too. We only got one card, which was kind of pseudo-madness, yeah.
We got Madness instead of Madness.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of other tribes and things going on Innistrad besides the whole vampire werewolf thing. There's that they're their own mess. There's a lot of other cards here. Can you tell me about your favorite card from Innistrad? And I don't care if it's from a different Innistrad set, Shadows over Innistrad, but what is your favorite card from the plane of Innistrad?
Well, speaking of Shadows, specifically, I started playing around 2015. I started collecting cards around 2015. And during that standard, there was Brain in a Jar. And that's the card that actually got me addicted to Magic. Just a super cool card. had some really busted interaction with fuse cards at the time. They specifically had to change the rules about fuse cards and split cards to nerf Brain in the Jar and Thing in the Ice. That was such a combo.
I absolutely love that. Brain of the Jar definitely came out of left field a little bit for me. I was not expecting that, and that is a phenomenal pick. I'm very impressed.
Oh yeah.
I love it.
I love like dirtily just kind of do nothing spells decks. You'd think that I would have been playing Izzet this whole tournament, but you know.
and yet here we are. Now, so that brings me to another question, because this is your first season of the VML, and you said you've been like collecting cards since 2015. So outside of the VML, what else get you in Magic? Like, what else do you do? Do you have any like content creation? Is there any like aspirations you have? Tell me more.
One of the main things that I love to brew decks. I am a major Commander player. I love EDH. I brew decks all the time. I do have a Twitch stream. It's not super active yet. I'm just trying to figure out my legs there, but it's Cardcaptor Vraska. You can find me out there.
Oh, everybody stop. Wait, hold on 1 second. Everybody out there in YouTube or in Twitch land or wherever you're watching this, take a second, go over to twitch.tv/Cardcaptor Vraska and give Jayne here a follow and leave some love. Leave some love. That is your homework right now. I know we're on a break here in the middle of the VML, so you have time. Keep watching this. Don't turn off the stream, but make sure you follow. And I'm sorry, you can go ahead now.
But yeah, I love to brew. I love to build like weird decks. The weirder the better. I play EDH with my friends. I actually dabble in designing cards. One of my dreams is to work for Wizards as a card designer. So I love making cards. I love making decks. Yeah.
Now, is there like a certain color that you like to work with, like when you're designing cards? Like what's your favorite? Do you like to like make creatures or instant? Like, is there something that like gets you that you like I love designing white cards, white sorceries or something?
I have a whole set idea that I had that was all about the dichotomy in between multicolored and colorless. Ooh. So yeah, I have an entire colorless commander deck, which I love very much. I also have a 5-color colorless commander deck and several 5-color decks. I just like multicolored and I like colorless stuff.
I think I need to see this fleshed out. So Wizards, if you're watching, you need to hire them.
You have my number.
Oh, that's so phenomenal. I love hearing about this stuff. That's so cool. I really do need to actually like see this fleshed out though. So that's
I mean, yeah, I can find some way to share it. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now we'll bring it back here to the VML, because this is your first season here. We're so happy to have you, glad to have you on board. What's been your favorite thing here that so far this season? Like what have you gotten from the VML, taken from the VML? Your favorite part? What do you think so far? How about that?
I am absolutely in love. This is my first season. This is actually my first tournament ever. There's two main things that I've really liked about the VML. The first thing was, the environment, like the super welcoming environment for, people of marginalized genders. Speaking as like a gender non-conforming person who's also femme, LGSs have been intimidating for me for a long time, and that's one of the things that's kind of discouraged me from doing competitive Magic. That's one of the reasons why I lean so hard into casual formats, is because my close friends are super welcoming of me, and we just have a great time playing Magic. But I love the game. Always wanted to get more into the competitive paper Magic, digital Magic, and this was a great opportunity to do so. So I was super happy about that. The second thing I've really enjoyed was facing some super good players. As a first-time tournament person, I figured out pretty quickly that I was up against some pretty stiff competition. So I did try and manage my expectations for what I could do. I didn't have access to a whole lot of like the meta cards for this tournament. But like I said, I'm a brewer, so I just took it as a challenge of like, how can I break this format? Can I do anything weird that will really wow people with like something crazy? I have a couple decks that I really enjoyed just going up against Izzet Epiphany, against Mono White, that I was very proud about. Like, I got a couple game wins in this tournament, and I got one super sweet match win against Epiphany with like a jank deck. So
Oh, that had to feel so good. I love the originality that we see from these decks like week to week, and it's awesome to have you like championing them too. So that's phenomenal.
yeah, I played 6 weeks and 6 different decks. So
Wow. Oh, I love it. Oh, I don't want to give too much away, but is week 7 going to be a 7th different deck?
oh yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay. So I am here for that innovation, for that awesomeness. So would you say now, because I heard you mention a couple different formats, your favorite format in Magic would be?
Commander, absolutely.
I love it. I love it. See, we got to get the VML on here. We got to get some
Yeah,
Commander.
so if you guys, I would love to see you guys during the off season getting on spell table, shuffling up proxies. Proxies are always a thing. It doesn't have to be a cost barrier to entry.
We're not here for barriers here at the VML. We welcome.
Yeah.
So. And another thing we are here for as the VML and as Team Werewolf are werewolf howls. So can I get your best werewolf howl, please, Jayne? That was wonderful. Knocked it out of the park, Jayne. Thank you so much for your time. Again, make sure you're following Jayne over at twitch.tv/cardcaptorvraska. So thank you so much for your time, and best of luck the rest of the season. Enjoy your brewing.
Thank you. Thank you. I definitely will.
Oh, good.
All right.
Bye. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Interview with the Vampire. I am your Mistress of Midnight, Nicole Callahan, joined here today by the wonderful Eleanor Meyer. Eleanor, how are you doing today?
I'll give you the answer I gave you before the interview started, which is I'm stressed, but
But it's like a good stress, like productive stress, like you take it, you work with it, and you you work on it. Did you want to talk about what's on your mind?
yeah, I'm thinking a lot about my matchup tomorrow. I don't want to say anything too specific, but it's a really tough matchup. My opponent registered a vampires deck that has some elements I was unprepared for. So,
You can out her if you want. She's watching, I'm sure.
I mean, I don't think it's anything outing worthy. It's completely respectable behavior. But
Oh no, I think your opponent is a phenomenal person.
it's true. I've been told she's extremely lucky, so we'll see how that plays out.
I love it. Extremely lucky has been called. I love it. I love it. That's so phenomenal. But well, best of luck to you in the matchup. That's one of the aspects of the VML that, you know, these are fun, like they're fun little interviews and everything like that. But it is a very competitive league, week to week. It's like, it gets very, you know, cutthroat, you know, from one vampire to another, you know, and really is very, you know, people, serious business. You know, it's a very welcoming community, the friendliest, nicest people. But for the week that you're playing each other, it's hard to be friends, you know?
Yeah. I'm actually testing with my opponent next week because she has a vested interest in me beating my opponent this week.
Oh my. Oh my. So, right? It's your enemies' enemies are your friends. So Speaking of your enemies' enemies are your friends. Now, we've got a whole bunch of different tribes going on here on the plane of Innistrad. We've got vampires, we've got werewolves, we got zombies. I think there's like a couple of humans even mixed in there. Can you tell me, what's your favorite tribe that's on Innistrad?
My favorite Innistrad tribe, I have like a joke answer and a real answer. My joke answer is scarecrows because I always appreciate it when people put scarecrows in their cube. I think it's really cute, and I'm glad that people are trying to make it work. But my actual answer would be humans, because I've played a lot of modern humans, and I really like the gameplay of that deck. So
that's awesome. I mean, I'm definitely, if there's a team scarecrow next season for the VML, I'm on. It'll be me and you.
Well, Brothers War is supposed to have a lot of artifacts, so.
Ooh, So we might get another scarecrow. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we can. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. But I will say, humans. If to be a human on Innistrad, you got to have some staying power. You know, you got to be tough to make it here, surrounded by all these extra phenomenal like beings, vampires and werewolves and zombies. I think the zombies is what gets me. So, but speaking of different tribes, we have a new werewolf that came out today in Alchemy. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see it. It's a new flip card. Alchemy, brand new format here that Wizards has released upon us. So, but why don't you tell me a little bit about your favorite Magic format?
My favorite format is Cube. I'll play any cube, doesn't matter. I've played some really terrible ones and still enjoyed them. So, and I like building them. I think it's a really cool design space, and there's a lot of opportunities for making your own cards, which I also really enjoy. And it's also very flexible in that you can take it very competitively, or you can just play for fun.
I love it. I love the uniqueness of cube, and that like I feel like each cube has like when someone builds their cube, it has their own personal signature. It has a touch to it, and I love that. I think that's such a phenomenal like just an individual thing in Magic where like you figure all these uniform cards, but no two people have the same cube. So, which I think is phenomenal. It's a great answer. Now I need to know: are there any scarecrows in your cube?
Yes.
Ooh, can how many? Is there just like the one, or is it like a few?
It's not a full theme. It's like a sub theme. So you can do the scarecrows if like the opportunity comes, but it's not fully supported.
I totally get that. I feel like it would be hard to support a full like scarecrow theme, but I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah, you throw a few shapeshifters in there, they can just always be scarecrow, goblin, monkey, pirates or something, right? Shapeshifters just get to be everything. Vampire, Eldrazi. So, tell me, now that we've talked about your matchup for this week, but in past weeks, how did you come to be in the VML? What's been your favorite part about the VML? Like, it sounds like you've made some like testing buddies and some, at least when you're not playing each other, testing buddies. So, so tell me about what you've gotten from the VML. What do you love about being here?
The reason that I signed up for the VML is because I felt like I was plateauing as a player, and the way I get fun out of Magic is by improving at it. And I felt like this was an opportunity that had all the tools necessary that I needed to improve. Specifically, the mentorship program has been really helpful. Haiyue is my mentor, and she's wonderful. We were testing just before this interview, actually. And being surrounded and networked with players who are way better than you is easily the thing that I needed the most to raise my gameplay to the next level. The opportunity to do so in a friendly and welcoming environment that is also cutthroat and merciless is great. I think something that occurred to me the other week is that the VML is the hardest PTQ in the world. It doesn't get harder. The format is grueling. It lasts a long time, and it tests every skill you can possibly have as a competitive Magic player other than limited. And there are so many killers in the ranks. It is insane how high the quality of the average player is. So I feel like this is a really unique space for people of marginalized genders to become excellent players. You don't get forged in the fire, as it were, in any other place.
I think that's phenomenal. I think like the self-recognition as a player with the plateau and wanting to improve and finding the VML as a place to improve, but also finding it as like you said, as a friendly and welcoming environment. I think that is just, just absolutely phenomenal that that the VML can supply such like a resource and a source. And like you said, there's there's quite a few ringers, quite a few end bosses in the 64 players. I'm like, wait a second, how much talent can you squeeze into one tournament? And it certainly is being like thrown to the werewolves.
Sure.
But thank you so much for your time tonight, Eleanor. I really appreciate it, and best of luck to you in your matchup this week and to you for the rest of the season.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night. Hello, everybody, and welcome back from break. If you're just joining us, my name is Nicole Callahan, also known as Lady of the Crease. I am joined here tonight by my expert commentator, Arya Karamchandani, also known as HogPog_98. Make sure you follow us on all the Twitters. Make sure you're following Arya on Twitch. Fabulous stream that she does. Really excellent Magic player. Former VML champion, a VML one-shot champion, and the resume keeps getting longer and longer and longer. So, but yes, welcome back. We are in week 7 of the VML, brought to you in association with the NRG series and sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. We're a 10-week-long Magic the Gathering Arena League, showcasing the talents of amazing people of marginalized genders within the Magic community. 64 players to start. We divided everyone into 8 divisions and did round robin for 7 weeks. This is the week 7. And after this, we're cutting to the playoffs, top 24. And what do the people in the top 24 get, do you ask? Well, there is a $3,500 prize pool. And everybody, for each win that they got during this regular season, got 500 gems for their arena account to get ready, for next season. We can't talk about anything like that yet, though. So hopefully next season. Come on, season 6. We love you, Wizards. And so, yeah, $3,500 prize pool, some gems, Channel Fireball Pro subscriptions going to our top 8, and an invite to the next Premier Set Championship going to our champion here in season number 6. So a lot on the line, but you got to make it there first. And that's what we're here to check out tonight. We are looking at our playoff scene. We've already watched 2 matches. We had the pleasure of watching Julie Izzette versus Emmaskyeward, who had been undefeated until Julie Izzette was able to take that match down. And we also just watched Jen Crotts on Black-White Aggro Control versus Zabracus on Mono Black Aggro, both at 4-2 in their respective divisions. Zabracus taking that one down, so moving up to 5-2, making it to the playoffs. Jen Crotts hoping that her breakers will hold out for a wild card slot, and we are on to division number 7. Division 7, and division number we are division 7, sorry. So we are in division number 7, and I think I'm just gonna tap out here and let Arya just take over, because we are looking at an Izzet Epiphany mirror. Ready, set, and go.
So we might not have known it looking at the feature matches we've had this week, but there were a lot of Izzet Epiphany mirrors. We tried to make sure there was some diversity in matchups coming your way, but this was far from the only Izzet mirror, and not surprising considering a lot of matches down to the wire for qualification, including this one. I believe both players are at 4-2, with the winner being guaranteed to make the playoffs and the loser having to hope that breakers work out. And yeah, it's an incredibly grueling skill testing mirror, with both lists in this matchup being quite similar, both having 4 iteration, for unexpected windfall, for Elrond's Epiphany. It's going to be some long games, and I'm excited to see how they play out.
Yes, and so we're taking a quick look here at Tania, the Bloodsowers list here. Team of ours, actually, on Arclight Gaming, playing a sweet Izzet Epiphany list. And like you said, there's some differences here. Tania is playing a creatureless main deck. I see some Smoldering Eggs and some Goldspan Dragons and a Malevolent Hermit kind of peeking there in the sideboard, but in the main deck, game 1, we've got no tangible threats to speak of.
besides land creatures or the all runs epiphanies. So, or burn down the house creatures and things like that. What are your thoughts about a creatureless main deck going into game 1 in the mirror?
In the mirror, I think I'm quite happy to have a creatureless main deck. A lot of the creatures are something of a liability game 1, with something like Leer being a little slow and clunky to tap down for main phase, Hullbreaker Horror being awkward against all the Divide by Zeros and Fading Hopes. Goldspan Dragon is the one exception as a card I might want to see even in my main deck. It's a card that generates so much mana. It's one of the few ways a player already pretty far behind can catch up. So not having those in the main is a slight downside, but 2 in the side makes up for that. So all told, I think it's a pretty well situated list for the mirror.
No, that's for sure. And we're going to take a look at the other side of this matchup will be Leina, and they are also on Izzet Epiphany, but there are a couple of creatures in the main. No, you will see there are a couple of copies of, there is a single copy of Leer and a single copy of Goldspan Dragon. So really not that many creatures, but kind of like, it almost feels like hedging a little bit, being like, oh, Leer, like the Izzet decks do get to look at quite a few cards with Scrying from Fading Hope or Expressive Iterations, Unexpected Windfalls. So I don't think running one-ofs in your deck is too wild.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on this list in general or in this matchup, in this mirror?
But I suppose both these decks haven't paid that much respect to aggressive decks. Both seem to be reasonably well prepared for the mirror, if not actively skewed for it. The one Leer in the main is somewhat clunky, but the one Goldspan in the main is very strong. Unfortunately, just a 1 in the 75 for Leina, so that means it's not something they can rely on as a way to catch up post-board, but I think game 1 it might lead them slightly ahead. And post-board, slightly more clunky sideboard for this matchup with a Leer, Cyclone Summoner, Hullbreaker Horror, all being cards that aren't great, but you're going to have to bring in some number of those threats. Meanwhile, Malevolent Hermit is quite awkward against sideboard plan filled of Smoldering Eggs from Tania. So a pretty solid list for the mirror, but definitely slightly behind out of the 2.
For sure. And we'll take a look and see how this match is going to work out. Now, we have, like you said earlier, both of these players at 4 and 2. So the winner here pretty much guaranteed a slot somewhere in these playoffs. The loser at 4 and 3 going to have to cross their fingers and their toes to get a wild card slot. And we'll see a quick keep from Tania here on 7. We are watching from Tania, the Bloodsower side, and a tap land and a pass of the turn. What do you think about this opener? Seems a little awkward, but
yeah, it doesn't do much. But to be fair, a lot of hands in this matchup won't. Perhaps the most important thing in this matchup is to keep hitting land drops. So the most important feature of this matchup is getting ahead on mana, and hitting land drops certainly an important way to do that, though generally best if combined with resolving some amount of unexpected windfalls.
For sure. That's been a long story tradition in Magic the Gathering control decks. You never want to miss a land drop, even if it is turn like 9. So we'll see. Yeah. Celeste is being the first spell cast here, followed by the foretold Behold the Multiverse on the side of Leina.
Yeah, no interaction for the Celestis is a little awkward for Leina. If she had been able to interact with the Celestis and then untap and cast Windfall, that would put her very far ahead. But without interaction, even if she casts Windfall here, she's only slightly ahead because Tania is able to make up at least a little bit of that difference with the Celestis providing extra mana.
For sure. And it looks like each of our players have 1 copy of the Celestis in their deck.
Yeah, and game 1 in particular, the looting text on the Celestis is going to prove to be very, very relevant. There's so many dead cards in this matchup, from Spikefield Hazards, Cinderclasms to Burn Down the Houses, that really just don't have much text in game one. You sideboard them all out for post-board games. So resolving a Celestis in game one and getting to loot over and over again is really, really strong and puts Tania pretty far ahead.
Yes, and as we see triple galvanic iteration in hand though. I don't know if that's like super awkward or really good. So
I think in the spot, the more iterations, the better. Really, it would be nice to have something to actually pair them with. But the fact that you can discard them to the Celestis and still have them have text and essentially get half a card by just looting the flashback card into your bin, means Tania should probably be pretty happy with them here. Without the Celestis, they certainly would have been a little clunky, but they make top deck windfalls and Auron's Epiphany is so much scarier.
yeah, speak of the devil, unexpected windfall will be the draw on Tania's side here, and pass back of the turn. Needing to time it whatsoever. Like how afraid is Tania of something like a divide by zero or the Jawari disruption or something like that coming from Leina's hand for either this windfall or an iteration or something like that?
It's not the scariest, particularly since divide by zero really isn't that bad. If Tania end of turn goes for galvanic iteration, unexpected windfall, and Leina goes for, say, galvanic iteration, divide by zero, returning both copies to Tania's hand, Tania would still just get to untap and once again go iteration windfall because she has so many iterations in this spot. So she's gonna pretty soon be at a spot where she can just tap out. I think the thing she's more afraid of is just Leina responding with windfalls of her own and getting value in a spot where Tania should be pretty far ahead.
Gotcha.
So it's with 3 iterations in hand, Tania's pretty safe to just wait a while if she wants to.
So this is definitely a stare down who moves first sort of matchup, it feels like.
Yeah, very much so. A lot of, particularly post-ball, a lot of games will look like that. But even game one, unless one player has a particularly well lining up hand, it might look like that. But yeah, in this spot, Tania gets a galvanic iteration, unexpected windfall. And even if Leina is able to counter both copies, with any untapped land off the top, Tania would be able to double galvanic iteration and unexpected windfall, and that it really only gets worse for Leina from there.
Yeah, we'll see Tania binning the soul copy of Burn Down the House. Not too great in this situation. Unexpected windfall, drawing a bunch of cards, and yes, a couple of lands, Spikefield Hazard, and a Cinderclasm. Cinderclasm might be a little awkward too, but that's quite all right. I guess it could kill some Epiphany birds, but
yeah, at this point, there's a bunch of dead cards, but it doesn't even really matter. Tania has so much more mana than Leina that she's just miles ahead. She just needs to ensure that Leina doesn't resolve a bunch of Epiphanies here, and as long as that's prevented, Tania should have this game.
So we'll see Thirst for Discovery, drawing even more cards, going to discard a basic land, so still going to need to discard a card here, looks like.
Yeah, I believe discard 2 even.
Oh wow, you are correct. 3, 6, but so it looks like Cinderclasm and Spikefield Hazard not proving to be too useful, like you had said earlier in this matchup. So discarding both of those, drawing a mountain, but also going to discard with the next land drop already sealed up in hand off of that Celestis loot, and pass back of the turn to Leina, who does have a full grip. 6 cards in hand now, with 1 card being foretold, tapping down a blue and a red, and foretelling another card. But it looks like that's going to do it. Pass the turn back to Tania.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Leina, in a spot like this, I don't think there's enough counter spells in the world to prevent Auron's Epiphany resolving if Tania really wants to go for it. But even if Tania doesn't, she's almost safe from any iteration plus Epiphany that Leina might have, just by virtue of that 1 Jawari disruption in hand. With all that mana and several galvanic iterations, should Leina go for something like Galvanic Iteration, Alrund's Epiphany, Tania could still just copy the Jawari Disruption a bunch of times and counter it anyway, without even needing a hard counter spell like Divide by Zero.
Oh, I like that. And yeah, I mean, there are galvanic iterations to spare, 2 in the hand, 1 in the graveyard, waiting to be flashed back. Flashed back. Yeah. I feel like flashback, I feel like you're supposed to add the ED on the end, but it feels really funny. So. And we will see the galvanic iteration being cast from hand. And Allrun's Epiphany, hopefully the target on Tania's side. Leina looking to stop it.
Yeah, in game 1, I don't believe there's a way for Leina to stop the Iteration Epiphany with just 4 mana.
And it looks like Leina agrees, and it's just going to scoop him up and say, you know what, that's enough. We're just going to head to sideboards here. Like you said, a lot of dead cards in this matchup in game 1, so we're not we're not sure what Leina was looking at, but it could have been, a couple of Demon Bolts and a Spike Field Hazard, things that aren't going to quite get the job done. So we're gonna head into game 2. Any thoughts on sideboard plans? I see a test of talents here in Tania's opener.
Yeah, the counter spells definitely come in, makes as the main way to attack the Galvanic Iteration plan. Notably, Tania didn't actually bring in any copies of Smoldering Egg, and that's really indicative of how the matchup has shifted over the last few months with Crimson Vow coming out. Previously, Egg used to be the best thing you could do post-Bard in the Mirror, but with Hullbreaker Horror as a threat that bounces opponents' creatures just incidentally, Egg has gotten a lot worse because Horror just answers it so easily. And on top of that, the fact that Hullbreaker Horror incentivizes people to keep in their fading hopes as a cheap way to interact with it means that Egg is definitely suffered a little as a control finisher these days.
Oh, no, for sure. Those are really good points, because I remember that used to be like the default where people would be like, yep, bring in my 3 egg or my 4 egg. And you had to be like, well, I know they're going to bring an egg post sideboard, so I have to leave in some sort of removal. So, but we'll see. Tiny keeping the 7 here. Able to draw runner on the land, looking pretty good. Triple Unexpected Windfall. It's quite it's quite a poker hand here.
One of the main benefits of being on the play in this matchup is just the ability to go for things more safely, and that's something Leina has very much had here. Tania would not have been able to foretell a card on turn 3. It would just have put her at risk of an Unexpected Windfall resolving. But yeah, Leina's been able to set up by double foretelling cards as a result, and this puts her in fairly decent shape with the double Beholder Multiverse, essentially drawing more cards than Tania's ever going to be able to keep up with. So Tania needs to find another access, such as a mana off this Unexpected Windfall, to get ahead on.
Yes, and it looks like Unexpected Windfall was the play there. Thinking about discarding the Spikefield Hazard at first, it seemed, but ending up discarding Behold the Multiverse to it.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that, yes, card advantage is nice, but really the only thing that matters in this matchup is mana, and on that axis, discarding Behold the Multiverse is way safer than discarding your only land and potentially not being able to make a land drop last turn. So a really disciplined play from Tania that I can definitely get behind.
No, it was definitely it seemed to be a very well thought out and executed. And wow, that's a Goldspan Dragon.
Yeah, and Goldspan Dragon is one of those cards, particularly in the pure Izzet mirror, that just gives someone who's behind on mana the opportunity to just win the game out of nowhere, even if there's not other cards that would do it. It dodges Test of Talents, which is huge because that's the primary counter spell in this matchup post-board. And on top of that, the fact that it lets your windfalls essentially be free often nets you mana on your Galvanic Iteration windfalls, and is a threat that if your opponent doesn't have an answer for, will just leave you really, really far ahead on mana. I mean, it's games that is cast or games that it resolves in tend to generally revolve around it.
Yes, and it looks like the Demon Bolt will take care of Leina's Goldspan Dragon here. Now, that is the only copy of Goldspan Dragon that Leina was running in the 75. So other threats perhaps in the deck now, like you said earlier, Cyclone Summoner or a Leer or a Hullbreaker Horror perhaps. But for now, we know that that's the only Goldspan Dragon to speak of. So
Yeah.
we'll see Celestis come down on Leina's side.
And even in this game in which the goal span was answered, its effect is probably going to be felt for a long time to come over the next few turns, with Leina having gotten ahead on cards with the Galvanic Iteration Behold at the cost of Tania getting ahead on mana with the Unexpected Windfall resolving, getting 2 treasures. But in answering that Goldspan Dragon, Tania has given Leina 2 treasures, so they're again even on mana, and Leina's drawn several more cards, so is slightly ahead on cards. So it's an awkward spot for Tania where she's going to slowly fall behind unless she resolves something big.
Yeah, and it looks like she's going to opt to try to get this executed now when Leina's probably most choked on mana that she will be for the foreseeable future. So it looks like attempting a Galvanic Iteration, copying Unexpected Windfall, Divide by 0 going to be the play from Leina's side. Now, there is a Test of Talents in Tania's hand. Do you think it will be deployed here?
I think Tania can afford to wait. I think if she divides this and then Leina has another counter spell, then Tania could fall really far. Could just end up in a spot where Leina essentially untaps and wins on her next turn.
So it looks like you're right, and Tania will hold. So only one copy of the Unexpected Windfall will resolve, drawing a couple of cards, Field of Ruin, another Unexpected Windfall, make a couple treasures, and hopefully living to battle another day. So
yeah. What makes Test of Talent so powerful in this matchup is that both decks are essentially a series of loosely connected pieces that if you pull one out, makes the whole thing come crumbling down. So by avoiding testing the divide by 0 in a spot like that, Tania makes sure that she isn't vulnerable to something like a Test of Talents on an Unexpected Windfall, which definitely prevents really harms the deck's mana production in the long game. Similarly, Test of Talents on Galvanic Iteration really hurts the card advantage, and Test of Talents on Auron's Epiphany hurts the deck's ability to win. So there's several really scary threats that you kind of can just win by having Test of Talents fall.
all right, and it looks like Leina going to Galvanic Iteration Allrun's Epiphany here, which is a little bit scary from Tania's side. So Tania going back and forth, debating on this Unexpected Windfall of her own, or like Test of Talents is an option, and it looks like that will be what she goes with here. Oh, and another Allrun's Epiphany in Leina's hand.
Yeah, and we talked about Auron's Epiphany hurting the deck's ability to win, but off the cards mentioned, off Test of Talent, out of Galvanic Iteration, Unexpected Windfall, Auron's Epiphany, I'd say Auron's Epiphany is probably still actually the least impactful card to get with Test of Talents, just because post-board the matchup revolves so much around mana that once someone's ahead on mana, they probably just win anyway, regardless of how many actual win conditions they have left in their deck. And in this spot, I'd say Leina is relatively far ahead, even with the Auron's Epiphanies being gone, with her having the ability to perhaps use something like the Hullbreaker Horror to close out the game without giving Tania an interval to get ahead, and actually leverage the fact that Leina's going to struggle a bit to close out since Tania doesn't have any answers for the horror at the moment.
Yes, I think that's part of the scarier part is when Test of Talents reveals your opponent's hand and you go, uh-oh, I don't know how I'm going to deal with that. You know, like I was able to take care of the Allrun's Epiphanies, but Hullbreaker Horror is staring me in the face. So We'll see Tania drawing a land for turn here. An iteration in the graveyard, double windfall, Epiphany, and land in hand. Going to play out that Field of Ruin here in preparation maybe for that Hall of Storm Giants. But
Yep, and if Tania can go for a Galvanic Iteration Windfall here, and that plays her in a single counter spell, and means that if Leina's going to spend a turn casting Hullbreaker Horror, at least she'll be falling behind on mana. But if Tania doesn't find an answer to the Hullbreaker Horror here, then it doesn't matter all that much how much mana she has, because things are going to be getting bounced for 1 mana, which is pretty hard to come back from. And if Leina has something like a Spikefield Hazard here to bounce an unexpected Windfall token, a copy, then the game is quite likely just over.
yes, and there is Spikefield Hazard going upstairs on Tania. So down to 13, but it's not the 1 damage that hurts as much as the dismissal of that extra card draw on Tania's side. Divide by 0 and a land off of the windfall that did resolve, however, and looks like Divide by 0 going to sack a few of those treasures, put that Hullbreaker Horror back into hand, checking out the size of Leina's hand as opposed to her own, and going to ultimately go with Mascot Exhibition as the learn card.
Yeah, and Tania did it actually ended up behind on that interaction despite having gotten the copy of Windfall with the token Windfall being interacted with, so she wasn't getting ahead on mana, and all the mana so she wasn't getting ahead on cards, and all the mana she generated off of those Windfalls being spent to divide by 0 the Hullbreaker Horror, leaving her in a spot where Leina can kind of just do the same thing again next turn, and there's really not much Tania can do about it. Since she's a blue-red list rather than version splashing black or white for removal, there's really not a ton of removal that just interacts directly with the Hullbreaker Horror. There's a lot of stuff that bounces it, and then you can use that time to try and get ahead. But if you're facing down a Horror and a press to answer it, blue-red is not a deck that's particularly good at doing that.
Yes, and definitely a scary threat. It does get scarier if you are unable to deal with it. We'll see an expressive iteration on Leina's side. So Unexpected Windfall going to be the exiled card here. And not really too much Tania can do. Hands are sort of tied. Just 1 lonely treasure and 4 cards in hand.
Yeah, Tania does have the advantage here that she's actually able to safely tap out on her turn, whereas Leina can't, because Tania could still resolve Elrond's Epiphanies and take extra turns to end the game, whereas Leina doesn't have the ability to do that anymore. But while that's some advantage in that it offers Tania the ability to play slightly more flexibly, she's still far behind on cards and mana in this game, so I don't like her chances.
Yes, we'll see Leina playing untapped land, 4 treasures, and the Celestis in play. So going to forego Hullbreaker Horror at this point, and Tania will draw Behold the Multiverse. I don't know, like, as far as that draw, if it was very good. It obviously does not answer Hullbreaker Horror. Not much does, but it's a little bit of a slower card draw spell. Probably not exactly what Tania was looking for.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's just really not very many great draws in Tania's deck right now. I think the way Tania wins this game is for Leina to just draw a bunch of lands and not really have any card advantage to close out the game with the Horror, allowing Tania to maybe just take a bunch of extra turns. But there's nothing much that Tania can do from her perspective. She kind of just has to hope the top of Leina's deck is unkind to her.
Yes, and I mean, even at this point, the Hullbreaker Horror, and just being able to cast those Galvanic iterations from the graveyard and not even need to play an instant or sorcery really after them. So that can bounce or answer most of what Tania has going on. So Behold the Multiverse, kind of a Hail Mary here. We'll see what Leina wants to, if Leina would like, if they would like to respond to this. Elrond's Epiphany and Jawari Disruption on the top of the deck. Tania looks to be interested in the Epiphany. As you said, it's probably the one No, it looks like both will go to the bottom. A galvanic iteration and a land will be the draw here.
Yeah. Epiphany is definitely Tania's route to winning this game, but she has to set herself up to be in a position to resolve it in the first place. And that means she really, really needs something like a Divide by Zero for the Hullbreaker horror, because as long as that horror is in play or in hand, threatening to enter play and bounce spells on the stack, going to the Galvanic iteration, Alrund's Epiphany is just going to put Tania further behind, but those cards are just going to get returned to hand. So she needs to make sure there's an interval in which the Hullbreaker horror can't resolve, or in which she can interact with it on the stack. Because if she doesn't do that, the long game plan of iteration Epiphany is not going to get there.
No, and this is Leina probably realizing that too and is saying, how much does this unexpected windfall matter? So I think that is the question on everyone's mind here. How much does this unexpected windfall matter?
Yeah, it's close to free for Leina to interact with the windfall. The only issue is it could leave her perhaps soft to cheaper threats, such as, well, the Goldspan Dragon that was just drawn.
Yes, and we see that's a fairly good draw, I believe, on the side of Tania. It's a good testing the waters, that's for sure. We know Leina has 2 galvanic iterations in the yard, a mascot exhibition, and a Hullbreaker horror in hand, along with 3 other unknown cards. So will Goldspan hit the dragon? Hit the Goldspan hit the dragon. Goldspan dragon hit the battlefield here, and the answer is it will. And it will attack. So treasure up for Tania.
Yeah, and one of the things Leina gets to do by taking this more conservative line, not playing out the horror at end of turn to interact with the unexpected windfall, is essentially it plays safe. It allows her to ensure there's really not much Tania could have. Well, we know that Tania doesn't have any Fading Hopes left in her deck, that she took them out during sideboarding. Leina doesn't know that, and what this line allows her to do is stay protected from something like a Fading Hope bouncing the horror at a key time to allow Tania to untap and resolve something like Galvanic Iteration Unexpected Windfall.
Yes.
So this line really safe against pretty much any 3 cards Tania could have in hand.
Yeah, I mean, and it's super tempting because Hullbreaker horror is lethal here on board at a 7/8 with the 2 flyers too. So I could see how that would have been super tempting for Leina to just get it down and get it done. And Tania is going to respond to the casting of the Hullbreaker horror on her end step.
Yeah, with Alrund's Epiphany being a sorcery, there's not a lot that Leina has to worry about out of Tania at this point. While Iteration Windfall is scary, it doesn't actually matter whether it doesn't actually matter as long as Tania can't actually interact with the Hullbreaker horror. The card advantage and mana advantage is nice, but Tania is just dead on board. So as long as Leina can protect that, she's safe to tap out at end of turn. Whereas if she tapped out on her own end of turn, then something like Galvanic Iteration, Alrund's Epiphany resolving could have punished her. With the amount of interaction she has, it seems like she'd have been safe regardless of what Tania had.
Oh my, and Test of Talents being copied here for, they're going to copy the copies of so Test of Talentsing a copy of Unexpected Windfall, and Test of Talentsing the original Unexpected Windfall to.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see whether Tania changes anything up in sideboarding at this point after Leina getting access to Tania's whole list, seeing how she sideboarded. It'd be interesting to see whether Tania did something like bring in Fading Hopes or bring in Smoldering Eggs, since Leina's going to assume they're not going to be in. Smoldering Egg particularly is an interesting one because, well, there's no reason for Leina to keep having removal for Smoldering Eggs, and at which point Tania can bring in the Smoldering Eggs because they're going to be hard to remove because Leina's taken out her removal for them.
Yes, and it looks like Tania will scoop it up here, seeing the writing on the wall and moving back to sideboards. And let's see firsthand if Tania makes any changes here in the sideboarding. Just taking a looked at the Smoldering Eggs for a second, thought about Fading Home, said, you know what, now we're good.
Yeah, the Egg may be better if Leina is not bringing in removal, but unfortunately, removal that hits Egg does also hit Goldspan, and so those cards are going to be left in anyway. And on top of that, Hullbreaker Horror is so risky to play into with Smoldering Egg that it's probably not worth the risk.
For sure. I mean, there is the creatures in Lena's list again are Goldspan Dragon, 1 Leer Disciple of the Drown, 1 Cyclone Summoner, 1 Hullbreaker Horror. And I'm sorry, there's a second Leer in the sideboard. Questioning which ones come in and which ones move out. But as we see, the Hullbreaker Horror was brought in. And we've got turn 3. Both players have 1 card foretold. Tania playing 3rd land here and considering playing the Behold the Multiverse at this point. Nope, just gonna shuffle around the cards.
With Leina having mulliganed, I believe, to 5 or 6, Tania's very much incentivized to just leave up Test of Talents as interaction. Since mana is so important in this matchup, the first player if one player stops making land drops anytime in the first 10-ish turns, they start to fall behind. And with someone mulliganing a bunch, they're quite likely to stop making land drops even. So Tania's incentivized to just hold up interaction, play the waiting game, knowing that eventually she'll be able to counter something Leina does, and Leina's going to be forced to tap down to try and make land drops.
It is true. And speaking of making land drops, we see an expressive iteration, one of the best ways to do that. And Tania is seriously considering this Test of Talents here, and it looks like that is what is going to happen. So getting to take a look at the hand, which is super valuable in a matchup like this. Taking a look at the library, pulling out 2 more copies of Expressive Iteration, kind of taking a look, seeing how Leina has sideboarded here. And,
part of what makes Test of Talents on Expressive Iteration so brutal here is not only the fact that Leina is leaning on it to hit land drops, but also the fact that these games in this mirror go really, really long, and both decks need all the card advantage they can get. And with the Test of Talent, with the expressive iterations all being gone from Leina's deck, that's 1 fewer tool she has to get card advantage and keep fighting and making land drops going into the late game.
Yes, I like seeing this from Tania's side. Tania not going to let down the Divide by 0 shield that she has up at the moment for a Behold the Multiverse at any point there to open up and let Leina just freely cast a Unexpected Windfall. So what she's going to try to do here.
And at this point, the only question is whether Tania beholds to try and find a Test of Talents or Jawari Disruption as it happens. Is a more efficient answer to this Windfall, because you don't really want Leina to have it back in hand. With Leina being down to 2 cards in hand, you'd rather just have her be almost hellbent and need a sequence of really strong draws to make it back into the game.
And we see Hullbreaker, we're a far ways away from a Hullbreaker Horror, and having Galvanic Iteration in the hand doesn't really do much if you don't have anything to copy, as well as the one in the graveyard. So Tania with a Demon Bolt, Unexpected Windfall, Double Hazard, and Divide by 0. So some interaction and some card draw and being able to dig further into the deck. We'll see Hall of Storm Giants the draw here. And just a pass of the turn back, Tania being patient here, making land drops and just passing.
Yep. With Leina being stuck on mana, already having missed 1 land drop, not having any expressive iterations in her deck to be able to dig for land drops, Tania is incentivized to just play a long game, knowing that eventually Leina will miss enough land drops that she'll be really far behind.
Yes, and we'll see. Tania just happy to go back to her turn. Drawing a second copy of Unexpected Windfall here. So unable to cast them both at the same time quite yet, but able to cast an Unexpected Windfall while keeping a Divide by 0 up as well. We'll see Leina foretelling a card.
Yeah, and having the second Windfall also means that if this Windfall gets interacted with, not only will Tania be able to force it through with the Divide by 0, but she'll also be able to just untap and resolve yet another Windfall, so she's getting very far ahead on mana here.
Yes, and I see an all runs Epiphany here. The draw as well as another land, which Tania probably feels pretty good about after discarding the Spikefield Hazard to draw a land off the windfall, and then another one in the draw step. So foretelling that Epiphany. And again, unexpected windfall up, divide by 0 up. It looks like gonna just fire off this unexpected windfall here, perhaps recognizing that she's a bit far ahead.
Yeah, I think at this point, Tania has so much mana, she just needs to find a Galvanic Iteration. If she does, she'll be able to Galvanic Iteration Epiphany and just win the game. With her making a land drop next turn, that puts her up to 12 mana, which is more than enough to Iteration, Flashback Iteration, and cast Elrond's Epiphany.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely plenty. And we see Test of Talents here from Leina, which probably doesn't feel too great. Yeah, like divide by 0 on that, and they just recast it. So
Yeah, divide by 0 targeting the test is probably unlikely to work out for Tania. She could divide by 0 targeting her own unexpected windfall, returning it to hand and fizzling the test. That's a little awkward with her having already discarded a card, so she's going down a card by doing this, but it's what she has to do
yeah,
in this
I mean,
spot. Going down to just a divide and land in hand is unlikely to work out for her.
oh, and it looks like taking a quick look at the sideboard, deciding to not learn there and instead loot, discarding a land and drawing a Jawari Disruption and another Behold the Multiverse here on the draw step. So Unexpected Windfall, Behold the Multiverse, and now a couple of Foretold cards waiting in the wings for Tania, and pass it back to Leina.
Yeah, I think Tania just recognizing here that more than anything, she wants to hit a Galvanic Iteration. If she hits a Galvanic Iteration, she essentially can't lose the game. So she just wants to maximize her ability to dig for it and find things like counterspells and make sure she can interact with anything Leina does along the way, giving her more time to find an iteration.
Yeah, well, speaking of counterspell and iteration, Tania just drew counterspell, iteration, counterspell, soft counter, but this got counter nonetheless. An iteration on Epiphany, and Leina's not got anything to say about that. So it looks like Tania's off to the races.
Yeah. And this should just be lethal for Tania with the 2 Hall of Storm Giants.
Yes, and I believe that Leina did the math a lot faster than I could have. So Tania will take that match down 2-1, and that was quite a matchup. Is it Epiphany Mirror?
Yeah, they tend to be really grindy, skill intensive games, and both players played really, really well there, I think, which is what made it so close. Leina's not out of contention yet. At 4-3 with decent breaker, she has a reasonable chance of making the playoffs, but getting to 5-2 Tania should be locked up.
Yes. So congrats to Tania for making the playoffs yet again here at the VML. She is a mainstay in the VML playoffs, and good luck to Leina. Hope those breakers hold for you. So that was a very exciting match. Like, honestly, I imagine, you've played Izzet Epiphany a few times through the season. When you see like you've got the Izzet Epiphany mirror, you're like, all right, I'm gonna like get myself comfy. I got a big glass of water here. Like, we're gonna do this. You're locked in. I feel like so.
I played it as an Epiphany mirror myself this week, so yes, that was very much my approach.
Now, that is actually a question I had meant to ask. Now, I've seen a lot of there was a big spike in Izzet Epiphany decks, I believe, this week. We had seen a lot of mono white coming back, and people experimenting with like Jund and things like that. And people were starting to put down Epiphany, but I feel like everybody like en masse just like picked it back up. So do you think it's just because it's become a more competitive deck, or people are just realizing like, I just need to play the best deck, even though I don't want to play Epiphany, or is it mirrors or things like that? Or
I think a large part of it would be the data from the Innistrad Championship coming out, where this whole time people were hoping that pet decks or various other mid-range decks could maybe hold a candle to Epiphany, and then the Innistrad Championship happened, and it became clear that no one can beat Epiphany. All the testing teams tried their best to find a deck that lined up well against it, and they couldn't find one, so they all just brought Epiphany, and I think that was definitely a sign that, yeah, maybe Epiphany just is the best deck and we have to deal with it. And also, well, this is the last week. We're getting to the point where people are playing matches that determine whether they're in playoffs or not. So they just want to bring the deck that has the max chance of winning. And Epiphany has looked to be that deck for the most part.
It has. It certainly has. And speaking of, let's move to our final match of the evening. We're jumping on over to Division 3. And we have Haiyue, fellow VML commentary, part of the VML leadership team, member of ArcLight Gaming. She does it all. She streams. Make sure, if you're not following her yet, I don't know what you're doing. Follow her on Twitch at Nefet. Follow her on Twitter. She is phenomenal, great Magic player, and we're very lucky to have her. And she is on Mono White Aggro this week. So it looks like a pretty... It's hard to say stock list because I feel like every Mono White Aggro list is just different. So like I like the Legion Angel package in Mono White Aggro. So I'm a big fan of lists like this. Do you have any like initial thoughts about what she has here?
I'd agree that it is a quote-unquote stock list. It's weird that all the mono white aggro decks manage to play such different cards, yet have exactly the same play patterns and play like exactly the same deck.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's fairly stock. I think most people have moved away a little from the versions of the decks with, say, 16 1-drops, and instead opting to run decks like this a little more resilient against cards like Syndiclasm. So fairly run-of-the-mill list for that.
Yes, the no Clarion Spirits, things like that. It's more like, are you playing 2 Thalia main or 3 Thalia? Like, are you going to play 2 Skyclave Apparition and 2 Brutal Cathar? Or, like, so I feel like that's kind of like the little choices that you make here and there. But that's, we land with the, like you said, pretty run-of-the-mill mono white aggro list. Like, it's here to do its job.
Yeah. Haiyue did mention that her list skews a little towards beating mono green. We see that with the 2 Brutal Kata and the 2 Skyclave Apparition main to go with the bunch more on the sideboard. It's maybe not common to run quite that many interaction creatures, but it's a slight skew at best, so it's not that far off of a stock list at least.
Yes, for sure. And let's take a look at her opponent this week. Would be Ruuchu. Now, earlier in the night, we kicked the night off with our other undefeated player, Emmaskyeward, at 6-0. Ruuchu is our second undefeated player in the VML. I believe it's just the 2 of them. Ruuchu also at 6-0. And as we were just talking about, they are also on Izzet Epiphany.
Yeah, and funnily enough, her deck too seems skewed towards beating a deck that Haiyue isn't playing, with there being maybe none of the cards that Izzet leans on a little to try and flip the aggressive mono white matchup post board in cards like Dragon's Egg. Historically, decks have also done to other colors with things like Sedgemoor Witch for that spot, but with the straight Izzet deck with no Dragon Egg in the sideboard, it is a slightly softer list towards aggro, though there's still a bunch of Syndiclasms that'll certainly put in work.
Yes, I see 2 Malevolent Hermit in the main, which is probably going to end up being more of a blocker than a counter spell. But we'll see how this all ends up now. So we've got Ruuchu at 6-0, Haiyue at 5-1. So the winner of this match should take down Division 3 and get a bye into the top 16, which is also where the cash prizes start for season 6. So a lot on the line here. This is like a guaranteed, pass right into the cash prize pool. So super excited to cover this, and let's get going.
Yeah, it's always really exciting when the last match in this season ends up determining who gets first in the division. So excited to see which of these players will just be getting a bye.
Yes,
both of them are, of course, locked for the playoffs regardless.
Oh, yes. So we will be seeing both of these faces in the VML playoffs starting in 3 weeks. The next 2 weeks, we will be off for the new year. Oh, and Mighty Linguini thank you for the raid. For all those of you who are joining us, welcome to the VML. We're brought to you in association with NRG Series, sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. This is a week number 7. We're molding our playoffs for here, and we are in the final match of the evening. We've got Haiyue on Mono White Aggro versus Ruuchu on Izzet Epiphany. So buckle in because it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, and we have an interesting situation of somehow both players haven't gotten close to their ideal draw, with Mono White curving an Usher into an Aspirant into Adeline, so it's the best 1-drop into one of the best 2-drops into the best 3-drops. Meanwhile, Ruuchu has Singleton main deck Syndiclasm that is definitely going to put in a lot of work against Mono White.
Oh, yes. And with 2 other removal spells to, back it up just in case for cards like Adeline, which have a little more toughness than Ruuchu would like. So we see that Adeline going to come down here. But before that can happen, Cinderclasm going to clean up the board. So Adeline's got nothing to attack with. It's just a 1/4 now. Not as impressive, right?
Yeah, I suspect it'll still be something Ruuchu wants to answer sooner rather than later. The ability to just generate multiple threats lines up pretty well against a list that just doesn't have any other. Well, there's no more Syndiclasms per spot. There's no Liers or other things to take over the game. So just an army of 1/1s is quite infuriating for blue-red. So Adeline, something that kind of has to be dealt with sooner rather than later.
For sure. And we see Haiyue drawing one of the 2 main deck portable holes to take care of one of the 2 main deck Malevolent Hermits that really kind of line up against each other, because I don't know that portable hole's doing much else, and I don't know if Malevolent Hermit's doing much else either. So they kind of take care of each other in that way. We'll see Intrepid Adversary coming down here on the side of Haiyue and pumping up that team.
Yeah, and Ruuchu does have removal spells for essentially Haiyue's whole board here, with Demon Bolt and Galvanic Iteration getting rid of maybe the Sun Gold Sentinel and the Intrepid Adversary, and the Spikefield Hazard cleaning up the Sun Gold Sentinel and the Hopeful Initiate, and the Spikefield Hazard cleaning up after. But even if she opts to not kill the Hopeful Initiate here and preserve a land drop, there's still really not much pressure from Haiyue's side, which is very much the spot the blue-red deck wants to be in at this point in the game.
Yes, we'll see Haiyue, after all of that, only being able to come across for 1. So Ruuchu down to 16, and Haiyue just a Hopeful Initiate in hand, but also a Faceless Haven on the battlefield. And Ruuchu is down to 1 card in hand, the Spikefield Hazard, and a Galvanic Iteration in the graveyard. So this Faceless Haven is looking to get in here. I don't know if Ruuchu's considering Iteration Hazard to just kill the Initiate at this point.
Yeah. One of the issues with that line is, for card advantage, Ruuchu's deck is a little reliant on Unexpected Windfall, as most Epiphany decks are. So if Ruuchu were to go down to 0 cards in hand to kill one of the Hopeful Initiates, that would mean Windfall is no longer a live draw to get back into the game on cards.
Yes, and I mean, this is definitely a threatening board state on the side of Haiyue. This is 9 damage threatening to come across next turn. So Ruuchu going to foretell that Behold the Multiverse, drawing Valorous Stance on the side of Haiyue. Pretty good protection spell here. Doesn't help against things like Divide by 0, but any other Demon Bolts that may come to be, it's a good protection against that.
Yeah, and the threats here, strangely almost resilient against a lot of interaction Ruuchu would have, with it being a set of cheap creatures. Something like Fading Hope is not quite going to cut it, while the Valorous Stance protects from damage-based removal. Not that there's much damage-based removal that would even cut it against a 3 toughness creature for 2 mana in Ruuchu's deck.
Yeah, so Ruuchu's going to start digging here. Behold the Multiverse, quickly bottom, and double Fading Hope is going to be the draw. So is that going to be enough, though?
It's going to buy a little bit of time, but the fact that any of these threats that Ruuchu bounces can just be immediately replayed including the Faceless Haven, since Haiyue has a middle land drop this turn, means that it's Ruuchu still needs more. It's not going to be enough on its own.
Right. So it looks like that scry will also go to the bottom after bouncing the Faceless Haven back. And one of the hopeful initiates still able to train. So 4 damage getting across. Ruuchu down to 6, divide by 0. So like a smattering of, yeah, fine. I can't even call the removal spells. It's kind of just like delaying spells in the hand of Ruuchu. But will that be enough? Faceless Haven firing up again.
Yeah, a galvanic iteration on divide by 0, hitting both the hopeful initiates may be enough to get Ruuchu back into this game, because it lets her learn twice as well as get something like Mascot Exhibition from a sideboard to stabilize.
Yes.
It's still a little awkward against the fact that Haiyue has Valorous Stance and Brutal Cathar on hand to deal with tokens off of a Mascot Exhibition. But it's with the information Ruuchu has, it might be enough to get there. And if she were to draw land, then she could also have Fading Hope up, and that would almost certainly let her stabilize at least for a turn or two.
Yes, and it looks like Mascot Exhibition and Teaching of the Archaics are going to be the choices here. Going to redeploy one of those hopeful initiates from the side of Haiyue and Jawari Disruption. So sort of a land, but not exactly the one that Ruuchu was most likely hoping for.
Yeah, and in this spot, Haiyue's definitely pretty far ahead, because she can answer multiple tokens off of this Mascot Exhibition, though notably she can't do that and also present lethal attackers, because she'd need to fire up the Faceless Haven to be able to attack for lethal, and cannot do that while also casting the Brutal Cathar.
Yes, so it's definitely a big choice here on the side of Haiyue. See what play she wants to go with. Legion Angel, not feeling too bad either. Nice flying attacker. Looks like Brutal Cathar will come down, and it's a question of which one of these 3 tokens do I eat? So the 3/2 will bite the dust, and Valorous Stance looks like it's thinking about coming down. I feel like that makes the Valor Stance a little more transparent on the side of Haiyue, but I don't know that Haiyue cares about that.
Yeah, there's not exactly a lot Ruuchu can do to play around it. It's just going to come down now, most likely, and allow Haiyue to attack for 1, allowing any future hopeful initiates to be lethal, or forcing Ruuchu to trade a 2/1 for it, and letting Haiyue have a lethal Brutal Cathar. So, yeah, not much Ruuchu can actually do about that sequence of events.
All right. Well, Ruuchu does draw Expressive Iteration, so going to be able to look at the top 3 cards here, see if any of these can help her get out of this tight situation. Whether or not she will be able to stabilize at 2 life, we will find out. Multiple threats on the battlefield on the side of Haiyue, with 2 threats still in the hand, and one of them multiplies in Legion Angel. So we will see.
While this spot looks to be pretty harrowing for Ruuchu, I'd say she's actually slightly ahead here, just by virtue of getting to this point where she has 8 lands in play and still being alive at 2, Haiyue only having 2 threats. Yes, Haiyue's threatening lethal every turn, and Ruuchu has to spend turn after turn interacting with what Haiyue is doing to avoid dying. But if Ruuchu hits a single Alrund's Epiphany that untaps all her lands, makes her 2 1/1s to block for future turns, the game's close to over for Haiyue. There's so much card advantage in this blue-red deck that so Ruuchu is basically never going to run out of gas, and in that spot, she'll have well and truly stabilized. So while Haiyue looks ahead on board, she really just has a few turns to close out this game before Ruuchu finds somewhere or the other to stabilize and end the game. If not literally, then effectively.
For sure. And then Ruuchu definitely taking a good long look at these cards, because needing to have an additional answer to either the Brutal Cathar or the Faceless Haven. So we'll see the Expressive Iteration putting another iteration into hand and debating here what's going back in the library. There we go. And a mountain will be the choice for exile, so that we can see in a second Expressive Iteration here. taking a look at another 3. And the decisions here, definitely a big decision. This is definitely a huge turning point in this game. Will Ruuchu be able to stabilize, or is Haiyue going to take down game number 1 here? Galvanic iteration to the hand, something back in the library, and a mountain now in exile. Can't play that.
Galvanic iteration plus Fading Hope will be enough to keep Ruuchu alive here, but she did just spend 2 expressive iterations and leave the whole thing with not having actually gotten ahead on cards at all.
Yes.
So still going to be in an awkward spot next turn in terms of finding things to do. But something like an Eleanor's Epiphany off the top, again, probably just ends it.
Yeah, I mean, and getting a couple looks at it with these Fading Hopes is great. Teaching of the Archaics will draw quite a few cards, depending on what Haiyue is able to redeploy here after these Fading Hopes have resolved.
Yeah, and with that being an unexpected windfall on top, Ruuchu's again going to be in exactly the same position of hoping the next few cards have an answer to what Haiyue's doing. But again, if they do, then she stabilizes.
So is it unexpected so iteration into unexpected windfall, or just a windfall?
It's got to be pretty close. I think if the iteration's not getting cast, and Ruuchu's more likely to cast Teachings of the Archaics, try and draw 2 cards and then cast iteration and copy some sort of answer. I think if you're casting Windfall, you need to go for the iteration first and try and draw the max 4 cards.
Yes. So, and it looks like that's what will happen. So those treasures, super valuable here. Drawing 4 cards, taking 4 looks. Spike Field Hazard, Galvanic Iteration, and Hall of the Storm Giants. And, a Field of Ruin, though.
Yeah, the field, really, really important. I mean, without it, Ruuchu would definitely have been dead on board to the Faceless Haven. But without even with the field, there still weren't actually any there wasn't actually any card advantage drawn by Ruuchu. So she's back in the spot of needing to draw an answer.
Yes, and we see Legion Angel grabbing their buddy Legion Angel. So it begins. Field of Ruin will take care of that Faceless Haven end of turn before going back to Ruuchu, who again is just holding on all these card draw spells after card draw spells. So we see a Behold the Multiverse in hand now, with another iteration if she so desires. So are we just firing it off like it has been the past 3 turns?
Yeah, I'd imagine there's got to be temptation both to cast this Galvanic Iteration beforehand and to auto hold it for a potential Epiphany. Casting the Galvanic Iteration beforehand makes Epiphany less backbreaking, but probably still quite good because Ruuchu is drawing 4 cards and scrying a lot here. However, non-Epiphany draws need to actually deal with Haiyue's board. At some point, we're reaching the point where Haiyue's playing out multiple Legion Angels each turn. There's no Syndiclasms to, save. There's no Syndiclasms to be copied with iteration to buy Ruuchu a bunch of times. So it's really Epiphany or bust.
Yeah, we saw bottom, and those are a couple of hits, an iteration and Epiphany here, able to cash that in with another Epiphany in hand. Galvanic Iterations waiting inside in the graveyard as well, and divide by 0. And now, is that enough?
I believe it should be enough and then some. With the divide by 0 taking, there's another extra turn coming after this. The divide by 0 could take out the blocking Legion Angel, and then there could be multiple more extra turns coming. I think Ruuchu has more than enough extra turns to just end the game here.
Yes, gaining a couple life of environmental sciences, just in case it wouldn't be. So environmental sciences going to hand, but I do believe that you are correct, and this should stabilize Ruuchu enough. Up to 3 life, making sure getting the next land drop here too. And There is a Hall of Storm Giants in play as well on Ruuchu's side, so
Yeah,
looking pretty good.
not the chain needs that. The birds alone off of the galvanic iterations and Alden's epiphanies would be sufficient.
Yeah.
I don't think Haiyue has as much she can hope for on this spot.
So we'll see galvanic iteration number 1, galvanic iteration number 2, and Alrund's Epiphany numbers 1, 2, and 3.
And for those wondering, I believe Ruuchu has access to 34 damage here, not including the hull. If we count the hull, then that would be 55.
Well,
so probably enough to kill Haiyue.
Yeah, I would say so. Bless you for doing the math, because I don't think I could have. Math is for blockers, and here there are no blockers. So, and another Alrund's Epiphany, just for good measure, on the side of Ruuchu. Gonna just foretell it.
Just
For
in
now.
case Haiyue
Just
has
in
some way
case.
to cast a fumigated instant speed.
Which we are not going to see here. So Ruuchu going to take down game number 1. And so far, Ruuchu with an extremely impressive record this season. Besides being 6-0, also up to week number 6 at least, had a game win percentage of 92.3. So I'm pretty sure that means that they won every game they played except for one.
Yeah. So definitely really impressive numbers, and also very impressively coming with a variety of decks, which has registered stuff from Dimir Control to Mono Green to Mono White to Izzet this week. So not just sticking with one deck, just demonstrating a really impressive ability across a variety of different decks in the format.
So very, very well done, and a well-deserved spot in the playoffs for Ruuchu, whether it be first or second in this Division 3 race. So one or the other. We'll see if Haiyue is able to unseat her from the division lead, or if Ruuchu is able to get out of the round robin unscathed. So it will be interesting to see here as we look at sideboards.
Yeah, some unconventional calls being made by Ruuchu, with particularly leaving the Lier in the sideboard for this matchup. Lier, conventionally one of the better things this deck could be doing post-board, just by virtue of letting you essentially have infinite interaction for the mono-white deck. But it does struggle a little against Haiyue's particular list having 3 Valorous stances. So Ruuchu, recognizing that she wants to make that card be as irrelevant as possible, and opting to not bring in the Lier, even though it would be strong were it not for the stances.
Yeah, and we're going to see both players down to 6 cards, 3 lands on either side. We got a Sungold Sentinel, an Adeline, and a Welcoming Vampire on the side of Haiyue, and double Fading Hope, Divide by 0, and then drawing an Alrund's Epiphany to start us off on Ruuchu's side. Fading Hope going to quickly take care of that Sungold Sentinel, and a Scry on the way for Ruuchu. What are your thoughts on this hand on Haiyue's side? Particularly, I'm curious about the Welcoming Vampire.
Yeah, Vampire is just a tool to make sure you don't fall far behind in the long game. Post-board against Mono White, Izzet decks have the ability to play much more of a controlling game by just not relying on Alrund's Epiphany as much anymore, since that's a card that gets taxed a bunch, and instead looking to one-for-one trade a lot with the Mono White deck, since the Mono White deck doesn't really have card advantage, and Welcoming Vampire helps fix that problem. We've often seen cards like Gavany Dawnguard in that spot for the same reason.
Oh, and I love this. I love Welcoming. I mean, it's not quite going to work, but Welcoming Vampire and Adeline work quite well together. Being able to make a token, draw a card, make a token, draw a card. That feels pretty good.
Yeah, and with the double Fading Hope, Ruuchu does have answers for everything Haiyue's going to do for a bit.
Yes.
But notably, Fading Hope, card disadvantage, going to put Ruuchu further and further behind on cards against all of Haiyue's threats. So should Haiyue keep drawing mana to make sure her threats resolve, the hand might end up, Ruuchu's hand might end up lining up quite poorly against what Haiyue is doing, just in terms of the long game.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Cards like Divide by Zero replacing themselves, that feels great. Cards like Fading Hope, not so much. But Haiyue being able to replay her threats pretty easily here. Drawing Redeem, not having a 5th land, so not able to double spell at this point. So it's a question of which 3-drop do I want to play here?
Yeah. I think the big moment here was for her to avoid casting Elite Spellbinder, since Ruuchu happens to have a Spike Field Hazard in hand. Anything short of Spellbinder is fine here. It's another threat that Ruuchu's going to have to wait yet another turn to be able to Fading Hope. And yeah, sure, it's how you spending a whole turn on it, but at the same time, Ruuchu is falling further and further behind on cards. Just leaving that Elite Spellbinder vulnerable to a Spike Field Hazard, though, letting Ruuchu untap for a turn without Haiyue having threats in play, could be huge. So it's pretty important for Haiyue in a spot like this that she doesn't play out too many X1s, since they're vulnerable not only to Spikefield Hazard, but to something like the just drawn Cinderclasm.
Yes, Cinderclasm now in hand for Ruuchu. There are 3 total in Ruuchu's list, and looks like Haiyue thinking about just playing out the Elite Spellbinder to maybe grab it out of hand, or at least make it more expensive, even if saying, hey, I'll trade my Elite Spellbinder for Cinderclasm. But little does Haiyue know there's also a Spikefield Hazard in hand.
Yeah, though if the Spikefield Hazard gets cast here, that's the Cinderclasm getting exiled and the Fading Hope also getting cast, that leaves Ruuchu with not very much going on. The Cinderclasm costing 5 mana is a ways away.
Yeah, from affecting everything too much. And honestly, like, Jawari Disruption's a lot easier to play against when you know about it. So so just Haiyue knowing, hey, maybe I don't totally tap out for a threat unless Ruuchu doesn't have any blue mana.
I think she can quite safely tap out even otherwise. Just Ruuchu's in a spot where she can't really afford to play the Jawari Disruption as a spell. She needs to do something like, discard it to Windfall or play it as a land, because it's really important for her to make that 6 land drop to actually be able to cast that Alrund's Epiphany.
Yes, and knowing that cards like Redain are in hand to make it more expensive and more difficult on Ruuchu's side to be casting these expensive spells. We all know it's a ways away. Sun Gold Sentinel looking to get in, and it will. And it's going to start eating cards from the graveyard. No iterations in the galvanic iterations in there at the moment, but still a pretty good ability. And we'll see Redain be the play here. Unexpected Windfall in response, an Alrund's Epiphany, and an untapped land. And a Divide by Zero will be the draws here on Ruuchu's side.
Yeah, at this point, it's just a matter of finding a window to resolve the Divide by Zero on the Redain to make sure the Alrund's Epiphanies can get through.
Yeah, and we'll see how you drawing a land here, which honestly isn't the absolute worst. Being able to cast more spells feels pretty good. So being able to double spell, cast 2/3 drops in the same turn probably feels pretty all right. Now, going to start with the Welcoming Vampire. Ruuchu already knew about it. Adeline going to be the follow-up. It's a question of which of these threats are you going to divide by 0?
Yeah, I think Ruuchu is kind of priced into dividing the Redain to make sure those Epiphanies can actually resolve. And it's going to be a little awkward for Haiyue, because it doesn't really matter that Haiyue has a bunch of cards. If Redain just takes like 6, if Redain gets divided by 0 and lets Ruuchu take like 6 extra turns to end the game, it doesn't matter that Haiyue has 4 cards in hand. So as long as Ruuchu makes sure to answer the Redain with divide by 0, that leaves her in a spot to potentially take over with Alrund's Epiphanies.
Yes, and that's going to be the play here as Sun Gold Sentinel and the 1/1 token off of Adeline get into the red zone. So Ruuchu's going to fall down to 13 and now have enough life to be able to enough mana to be able to cast those Alrund's Epiphanies. But Cinderclasm was the draw here. With the Cinderclasm in hand and the Cinderclasm as well from the Elite Spellbinder, the heavily taxed one, what do you think is the play here?
Yeah, double Cinderclasm means that, well, at the very least, Ruuchu doesn't need to cast the Epiphanies now. She can just wait a couple of turns. And that leaves Haiyue in a slightly awkward spot where she needs to apply pressure to Ruuchu, but if she commits too much to the board, then she leaves herself vulnerable to the double Cinderclasm.
So we'll see Redain be the starter here. Thalia the draw for turn as well. So getting heavy on the tax part of the white aggro deck. Ruuchu thinking about her options here if she needs to do anything in the face of Redain before it hits the battlefield.
Opting to cast Windfall is a little awkward because I do believe it leaves her just dead here if Haiyue just plays out creatures. Or even on board even.
Perhaps. Eating a Cinderclasm, getting in. That makes an extra token at... So Adeline is 6, and that is Xaxes with the extra token and the pump on Adeline. So how are you going to take down game number 2? So we are heading to game number 3 here in week 7 of the VML. This is for the lead in Division 3. This is for a bye into the round of top 16. So you just get to skip the round of top 24, go right into the round of top 16. And that's where the cash prizes start. There's cash prizes for the top 16. A big thank you again to Wizards, Channel Fireball, and the NRG series for making this season possible and for supporting us. So y'all are great.
Yeah, game 3 on the play a little better for Izzet, definitely. More than a little better even. With, well, you just have an extra turn, and the big issue this deck struggles with is just falling behind. The big issue that Izzet struggles with in this matchup is just falling behind in the early turns, so being on the play makes that less likely to happen. But still by no means easy with the fact that the deck doesn't have any smoldering eggs or similar tools to get really far ahead post-pod.
Yeah, we see Ruuchu with plenty of answers to these creatures, but no more lands after this and no blue mana to speak of as of yet. So Burning Hand's going to take care of that Sun Gold Sentinel, but doesn't look like any lands and unable to cast either of the expressive iterations. And you can see Haiyue moving a little bit faster here, being like, all right, so let's take a little looky-loo and see what we got going on. Gonna just take Cinderclasm here, saying, you know what, if you draw blue mana, you know, so be it. You have a second expressive iteration anyway. I'm going to take the one thing that might kill my entire board. So
yeah, and I think if Haiyue just applies pressure here, stumbling on a land drop in a spot like this, really awkward for Ruuchu because there's not really draws at this point that even get her out of it. The faceless,
wow, yeah,
the faceless haven is going to clean up even in the case of a board wipe.
Yeah, and that was it. Ruuchu 9, and there was 9 power on the board. So good games to both of our players. Wow, like after such an eventful like game 1 and 2, I was just like, oh wait, what's happening? But yeah, missing a land drop and missing a color. That's definitely a tough way to go out, but still not out for the count by any means, as both of those players are moving on to the playoffs. So good games to both Ruuchu and Haiyue. Looking forward to seeing you both in the playoffs starting in 3 weeks. We will be off the next 2 weeks for the holidays, but be sure to follow us. Be sure that you're following us on Twitter at VMLMTG. Follow us here, obviously, on Twitch, VMLMTG. Find us on YouTube. We are everywhere. So make sure you're following. You don't miss a thing. Any closing thoughts for this evening?
Well, it was really exciting to see a bunch of different decks being played this week, and seeing a bunch of decks having at the very least the tools to play against Epiphany, it makes me hopeful that there'll probably be a slightly diverse metagame in the playoffs, even if Epiphany will likely be the most represented decks. More than anything, it makes me excited to see what the playoffs hold.
Yes, and for those of you who joined us later, we had Jen Crotts versus Zabracus from Division 2. Zabracus was able to take that down on mono black aggro over Jen Crotts on black white snow Edgar control. Division 3 we just watched Ruuchu on 6-0 on Izzet Epiphany versus Haiyue at 5-1 on mono white aggro. Haiyue took down that matchup. Division 6 we had Julie Izzette versus Emmaskyeward, our other 6-0 competitor, and Julie took that down on Izzet Epiphany, so is now 5-2 against Emmaskyeward's mono green deck. And from Division 7, Tania, who had been 4-2, was able to take down the matchup, the Izzet Epiphany mirror versus Leina, who falls to 4-3 from Division 7. So just to catch you all up on that. So very eventful night. Cannot wait to see how the divisions kind of settle out and who makes a wild card and everything. It's just like, this is always the most exciting time of year. And then you have like the next 2 weeks to just think about like your deck choices and things like that. And one of the coolest things about the VML is the ever-changing deck lists and being able to metagame week to week. So it's pretty sweet. Love the setup here. And I want to take a second just to thank you all for joining us here tonight. A big thanks, obviously, to NRG, to the NRG series. They are fantastic. They are our partner in all of this, the reason that we are able to do this. So thank you very much. A big thank you to Channel Fireball for all their support on social media and towards the prize pool. And obviously, a huge thank you to Wizards of the Coast. Thank you so much for your support and a love and, pushing us and go season 6. So it's amazing that we've gotten this far. A big thank you to our admin and leadership team, all working hard behind the scenes, our casters, our players, our viewers, and my favorite, our wonderful producer, Phoebe, who, again, take a second, make sure you're following her on Twitch, Code Indigo. She is phenomenal. She works her behind off every single week to make sure that this production is A+ top notch. So hats off to Phoebe. You are always the best. And a huge thank you.
So nice for you to say, Nicole.
To my co-host here tonight, Arya.
Thank you.
Arya Karamchandani, one of the best Magic players that I know, bar none. Like, if not the best. So I'll just put that out there. Hogpog _98. Make sure you're following her on Twitter and Twitch as well. And if you haven't gotten your fill of Izzet Epiphany yet, make sure you check out her primer. I would like you to give a little plug.
Yeah, I wrote a piece over on Channel Fireball going over everything Izzet in Standard. And thank you so much for casting with me, Nicole. It's always an absolute pleasure and honor.
You are very kind. So yeah, I mean, if Izzet Epiphany is going to be this popular during the VML playoffs, I would definitely check out the piece that Arya wrote. So, but yes, thank you all for joining us tonight. From the follows, the viewers, you all are phenomenal, and we will catch you all in about 3 weeks. Make sure that you are following us so that we can keep you updated on all the goings-ons, our playoff scene, and everything like that. All the exciting stuff. So yay, playoffs! Have a wonderful night, everybody.